Chapter 8:10. After passing through several checkpoints, the Assistant Secretary of the Minister of Security finally entered a special room after swiping a special password lock and unlocking his pupils and fingerprints for the last time. There were all kinds of advanced equipment here, as well as many professional elites. They were all talents from the army and the police force that had been discovered by the minister. This was the headquarters of the Ministry of State Security and also the hub that commanded the entire national security system. The secretary was now facing a separate office with glass walls in the room. The curtain was only lowered halfway, but it was enough to see how many people were inside. Only the minister was there. "Minister," the secretary called after opening the door. The minister, who was leaning on the chair with only a coat over his body, opened his eyes at once. His eyes were bloodshot. It had been 2 days and 3 nights since the hostage incident, and he hadn't really rested or left the command center. He looked very haggard. "Minister, would you like to take a nap in the lounge?" the secretary asked worriedly. The minister waved his hand and rubbed his face hard a few times. His voice was a little hoarse, but still clear. "What's the news?" A lot of things had happened in the past 2 days, the most important of which was the hostage incident at the theater and the assassination of the Senate Speaker. Because everything happened almost at the same time, the president was furious and gave a death order that the murderer must be found in the shortest time possible. The personnel who attended the concert that day are all under investigation. I'll inform you as soon as there's news. The minister was still rubbing his eyebrows. "Anything else?" The secretary hurriedly opened the file in his hand. "It's like this. About the investigation of the hostage incident. The technical department checked the bomb wreckage and found something." The secretary opened the file, turned it around, and pushed it directly to the minister. The director picked up the document and read it carefully. He would not be careless about anything, even if it was something trivial that was mentioned in the document. But his brows suddenly furrowed. "The residue of black gunpowder?" The secretary nodded. "Yes, the technical department said that based on the wreckage of the bomb, they can deduce that this thing should be a standard production. Logically speaking, the amount of explosives buried in the theater should be enough to blow up the whole theater. But for some unknown reason, the highly concentrated explosives inside turned into black powder. We found an activated detonator from Roger's body. I believe he wanted to activate the bomb before he died, intending to die together with us. But the last resort that should have been used to perish together actually turned into black gunpowder that has no power at all." The minister pondered for a moment. "Do you think Roger was tricked when he got these bombs?" The secretary shook his head. "I believe that a buyer like him would at least check the bomb." "That's strange." The minister was even more puzzled, and he looked at his secretary. In addition, something strange happened during the rescue of the head of parliament. According to the testimony of the storm squad, before they arrived, Crocodile and the other criminal were already unconscious, but only the head of parliament was left in the room. "We believe that the head of parliament didn't have the ability to save the two of them." The secretary added, "In fact, when they were in the concert hall, the criminals guarding the theater also fell into a coma for no reason. Later on, when our people seized the guns, we found that the magazines in the guns were all gone. However, according to what the hostages said at that time, the guns should have bullets because the criminals had fired before." Things seemed to be getting stranger and stranger. The minister suddenly had a bad feeling. When something was beyond common knowledge, it was easy to fall into an inexplicable fear. There was no doubt that the minister wasn't a person who liked things that couldn't be explained. "Send people to investigate the theater again. Don't miss anything," the minister ordered. Then he seemed to think of something. "By the way, has the outside communication and power been restored? Someone is already repairing it, but the scope is too wide. Several main cables have been burned because of a short circuit. I'm afraid it will take at least another 48 hours to restore the city's power. As for the communication, it can be repaired soon. But during the storm, most of the electronic devices on hand have been burned. Currently, there are not so many mobile phones on the market. I'm afraid this is a more troublesome matter." Despite this, the security department's hub still worked as usual because the equipment and power supply system here were independent systems, so the security here was remarkable. "Why?" We specifically asked several professors in the Scientific Research Institute, but their explanations are not consistent. The secretary said helplessly. I also asked the observatory. They also said that they didn't find any particularly strong activity in the sun. The kidnapping, the assassination of the senator, the disaster of the storm, all happened in the past 2 days. It's like a world dominated by horror in the movies. The minister suddenly smiled bitterly. It's really ironic that it happened in the city of God. Everything has its cause, as long as we can find a breakthrough. The secretary comforted him. The minister nodded. Then he cheered up. Give me a cup of coffee. The secretary quickly said, Minister, you haven't rested for several days. Why don't you go back and rest for half a day? Besides, Dr. French was also frightened this time. Don't you want to go home and see him? The minister was silent for a moment, then suddenly asked, Didn't he ask Billy's people to send him home? The secretary said, The doctor didn't go back. He went directly to the university's laboratory. I heard that he has been running to the place where Mr. Billy was hospitalized these 2 days, but the bodyguards didn't let him pass. As for Mr. Billy, although the operation was very successful, he hasn't woken up yet. The doctor said that he lost too much blood and was infected with some bacteria. He's been having a high fever these 2 days. The minister rubbed his forehead. How did he get in touch with Billy? Is he still looking for sponsorship for the satellite launch plan? He keeps doing things that are thankless. This stubborn guy. Minister, okay, I know. The minister waved his hand. I still have a few documents to read, and I have a meeting in the afternoon. I have to go to the presidential palace before 5 o'clock. As for the rest, let's talk about it when I'm free. Okay, then I'll go out too. The secretary nodded. White Hell beside the lamppost opposite the door of the White Hell bar. Caroline and Arnold were sizing it up. They had been here for half an hour. After several discussions, Caroline decided to find Hailey in order to prove her innocence. The only clue was that Livia had mentioned that she and her boyfriend had dated in this White Hell several times. According to what Arnold said about Hailey, Caroline felt that a punk like Hailey should know the people in White Hell, so maybe she could get information about Hailey from some of the bar staff. It's not open yet. Arnold frowned. Because of the strange weather, many places in the city were not yet electrified. As for the people in the city, they were busy cleaning up the damage caused by the weather. The sides of the road were now very deserted. I'm afraid it won't be open today. Arnold looked at Caroline and said helplessly. Caroline's face had a trace of irritation. She had smoked one woman's cigarette after another, and there were already 7 or 8 cigarette butts on the ground. Arnold frowned and snatched the cigarette that Caroline had just lit. He threw it on the ground and stepped on it to extinguish it. Relax, you're not in a good state. Don't worry about me. Caroline frowned, then walked straight to the door of White Hell. Arnold had no choice but to quickly follow her. He didn't know who said that he should never confront a woman who had made up her mind. This was because such a woman was more stubborn than a man. Arnold felt that Caroline might be this type. She was slamming the door of White Hell hard, but it seemed that this simple and crude method worked well. Soon, White Hell opened, and a burly man covered in tattoos opened the door impatiently. What's the matter? We're not open for business today. Hurry up. I want to ask you something, Caroline said quickly. At the same time, she took out a few banknotes from her bag. You'll get paid. Miss, you really know the rules. Tell me, what do you want to ask? It was obviously not the first time someone had asked him something, so he skillfully stuffed Caroline's banknotes into his pocket. Have you seen Hailey? Do you know where he's been recently? Caroline asked straightforwardly. The burly man was stunned. He opened his mouth, frowned, and took out the money that was stuffed into his pocket. Are you kidding me? Isn't Hailey right next to you? Caroline was startled and subconsciously looked at Arnold beside her. The latter just gave her a helpless smile. This is not the first time I've done this kind of thing. You saw it too, right? With that said, Arnold didn't explain too much. He just took out his ID card and waved it in front of the burly man. Look carefully. My name is Arnold. The Hailey you mentioned and I are twins. Now Hailey is missing, and I can't find him, so I came here to ask you. The burly man held the ID card in his hand. After looking back and forth a few times, he grabbed his hair. Is this ID card fake? I've never heard him say that he has a twin brother. Arnold said indifferently. "If you don't believe me, I can go to the police station with you to check if this ID card is real." The burly man shook his head and returned the item to Arnold. He then shrugged, but quickly stuffed the banknotes that he had just taken out back into his pocket. "I haven't seen this guy for more than a month. Sorry, I don't know where he is now." "Then the last time you saw him, what was he doing? Did he say anything about his body?" Caroline asked. The burly man was very cooperative after receiving the money. He shrugged and said, "What else could that guy be doing? Isn't he just picking up girls here? The last time I saw him, he should have just picked up a prostitute." "Prostitute?" Caroline frowned. The burly man smiled and said, "I forgot her name, but that woman is hooked up with a few men here. I've done it a few times, so I recognize her. I also talked about this with Hailey, saying that this woman is very coquettish, and her skills in bed must be very good." Then Hailey made his move. "Hey, this guy is actually not bad looking. He looks decent after dressing up." It didn't take long for him to hook up with her. Caroline's brows were almost twisted into 3 lines. She couldn't help but feel sad for Livia. Livia told her that her boyfriend had never known her identity and profession. She didn't expect that the other party had already known about it and had come for this. She was afraid that he knew that Livia was Adam's call girl and had planned to cheat money and sex from Livia from the beginning. "Oh, by the way, maybe you can go to a place where you can find Hailey." The burly man seemed to have remembered something. "Say it." Caroline glared at him, but the burly man pursed his lips and had a strange smile on his face. Caroline glared at him again before reluctantly taking out a few more bills and slapping them on the burly man's chest. "Kata Club." The burly man smiled and said, "Once he drank too much and said that he got a temporary job there, but I don't know if he's still doing it now." As he spoke, he stared at Arnold beside Caroline with a strange gaze, then rubbed his chin, and the smell of his strange smile became stronger. Arnold frowned and said, "What kind of place is Kata Club?" Caroline said coldly, "A place where rich women and some guys with special sexual fetishes find men." "Miss, you know quite a bit. Have you played there before?" The burly man laughed strangely. "Shut your mouth." Caroline gave him a cold look, then turned and walked away angrily. Arnold had no choice but to quickly follow. The two of them soon disappeared from the burly man's sight. The burly man didn't care. He happily counted the consulting fees he got from Caroline and even whistled. But at this moment, he heard the crisp sound of footsteps. A woman in a black dress and a black umbrella was walking in front of him and then stopped. This woman was very pale and looked abnormally weak. The woman looked up and sized up the door of White Hell, and the burly man also saw her face clearly. The burly man was used to mingling in brothels, so he couldn't help but say, "Hey, beauty, there's a power outage here, so we're not open at night. But I can open a private room for you. Do you want to come in and play? I'll treat you to a drink." "White Hell, White Hell." The woman smiled slightly. "There's a place with such a name? Cool, right?" The burly man was quite proud. The woman chuckled and said, "Inside is really hell. Are there demons? Do you like demons?" The burly man laughed and then flexed the muscles on his chest. "Demons are not as strong as me." "Then please let me see it." The woman with the black umbrella smiled sweetly. "My family and I happen to be homeless now, so we're planning to find a place to stay." With that, the woman showed a seductive look, then walked past the burly man and went straight into the White Hell bar. The burly man showed an infatuated look, then he turned around and slowly followed in with a dull look. Not long after, a blood-curdling scream was heard. In front of the door, a bloody hand reached out and grabbed the door. But in the blink of an eye, the hand quickly loosened, as if it was dragged in by something. The gate fell down with a loud thud. Chapter 811. According to the plan, they needed to take the train from Sao Paulo. After arriving at a certain city, they would transfer to a plane and leave the country to reach the home mentioned by Songhausen. That was already a place in another country. Of course, geographically speaking, it was still located on the continent of South America. At dawn, they had already set off by car. They left Rio due to the blackout caused by yesterday's storm and caught the train from Sao Paulo. Songhausen visited Luaccio last night and received Luaccio's reply in the middle of the night. He was not surprised that Luaccio replied so quickly. although all of this seemed to go unexpectedly smoothly in his opinion. However, his superhuman intuition felt that there was no problem with this matter. Without a doubt, Song Howren trusted his superhuman intuition very much. The train passed through the emerald green forest road, making a roaring sound. Now, he was already in the first-class cabin of the train with Luochio. Song Howren was naturally not short of money. Of course, he would not treat himself badly when traveling. At the same time, Luochio also saw the so-called Xiao Li and Ah Chong. Of course, he now knew that Xiao Li's name was Luvia. The real name of the one who used to be Ah Chong was Oni. Luvia and Oni looked at Luochio with a somewhat strange gaze. This was because Song Howren did not reveal Luochio's identity to them. He only said that he would be a very important guest of his father. At the same time, Luvia and Oni also found out through some special channels that their father, who had not left the base in recent years, seemed to have taken action this time. He began to ask people to arrange the itinerary. This time, the meeting with Luochio seemed to be in another city outside the base. Although it was not in the base, it was actually a place where the iris flower's power was deeply rooted. A iris flower could be a place where a local ruler could rule. Be that as it may, this was indeed the first time his father had left in the past few years. Even if it was a leader of a traditional faction in South America like the Flame King, his father would not personally come out of the base to meet him. Luochio's identity really piqued Luvia and Oni's curiosity. Additionally, Song Howren was really kind to Luochio. Could this be the military advisor's illegitimate child? Luvia and Oni naturally weren't in the same cabin as Song Howren and Luochio. Instead, they stood guard outside like guards. Luvia rolled her eyes. She didn't know how she had been able to partner with this guy all this time. She was actually able to endure until now. Oni was used to seeing this. He chuckled and said, "You better believe me. Back in my village, there were a lot of 13 or 14-year-olds who were fathers of children. I heard that the military advisor's homeland also has a tradition of early marriage and early childbirth. Military advisor is only 29 years old this year. No matter how you look at it, Luochio is only 21 or 22 years old this year. You can give birth when you're 7 or 8 years old." Luvia rolled her eyes again. Oni shrugged and said shamelessly, "Anyway, I lost my first time when I was 9 years old. It was with the lady next door. In the past, people call me Oni next door. You're just a boar who only knows how to breed." Luvia viciously stepped on Oni's foot. The two of them began to quarrel with each other. However, at this moment, someone suddenly walked past their seat and seemingly left something behind. It was a note. Luvia pretended to casually pick it up. Then, she opened it and glanced at Oni. Finally, the two of them left their seats one after the other and went to the other cabin. Before leaving, Luvia took out her mobile phone and sent a message to Song Howren. Song Howren appeared to be very interested in the scenery outside the window. He rested his chin on his hand as he looked outside the window. At the same time, his other hand was playing with a round plate. This plate was something that he always wore around his neck. At this moment, Luochio was sitting opposite him, quietly reading a book. The mobile phone placed on the simple table suddenly rang with a text message. Luochio and Song Howren glanced at the mobile phone at the same time. Then their eyes met. Song Howren did not seem to be in a hurry to read the content of the message. He just gave a faint smile and looked out the window again. "A very special plate?" Luochio suddenly asked. Song Howren looked over and asked, "Are you interested?" Luochio said, "I just feel that very few people would wear a plate. Is there any special story behind this thing? I think you're thinking about something." Song Howren suddenly became mysterious at this time. He lowered his voice and said, "If I tell you that this plate is something that God gave to human beings, and it can bring incredible power to the person who owns it, would you believe it?" Luochio was startled. After turning his eyes, he chuckled and said, "For example, the black python that appeared in your adventure story? You haven't answered me yet. Do you believe it or not?" Song Howren's playful expression became stronger. Luochio simply said, "Then at least let me see with my own eyes what the so-called incredible power is. Then watch carefully." Song Howren took a deep breath at this time. then opened his hands in front of Luaccio. His fingers were very slender, which should be very suitable for playing the piano. Song Howard pinched the sleeves of his hands, then waved them in front of Luaccio. Then he took out a coin and put it in his left hand, then clenched both hands at the same time and put it in front of Luaccio. "Which hand do you think this coin is in now?" Song Howard asked with a smile. Luaccio pointed at his right hand. Song Howard opened his right hand, but there was nothing. He then opened his left hand. The coin was still in his left hand, and there was no change. Song Howard chuckled at this time. "Does this count as incredible power?" Luaccio smiled, then looked out the window. "You are like the sun. I just feel that you are a little boring." Song Howard put the coin on the table, then spun it, as if he could play with this coin happily. "Actually, there's no need for the two of us to book this place," Luaccio said casually. "Why don't you let your friends sit together? They have some other things to do, so they can sit in the back carriage." Song Howard looked at Luaccio and blinked. "As for booking this place, the purpose is very simple." Luaccio showed a puzzled look. Song Howard suddenly clapped his hands, and a steward outside the first-class cabin pushed the door open and walked in, holding a bottle of red wine in her hand. "Wine?" Luaccio was a little surprised. Song Howard shook his head, then suddenly stood up. "She is the one who will drink with you." Song Howard smiled and walked behind the steward, gently holding her arms. "She will make you feel less bored. Of course, if you want to do something, there is enough time." "Well, I have something to do next." "Wait." Luaccio frowned. "Take good care of this distinguished guest, beautiful lady." "Yes, Mr. Song." And so, Song Howard patted his butt and left. There was no doubt that this was a woman with a very good figure and appearance, and she was also an Asian, very much in line with the Chinese aesthetic standards. "Sir, may I sit down?" The woman sat down and exhaled, "My name is Gan Hong." Boss Luo nodded, and at the same time, he was curious about the woman's accent. "Your accent?" The woman's eyes were filled with lust, and she bit her lips, then took out 2 glasses from under the table, and intentionally or unintentionally moved closer to Boss Luo. "My father is Vietnamese, and my mother is Thai." Gan Hong smiled slightly and skillfully opened the bottle of red wine. "Did Mr. Song say anything to you?" Boss Luo asked curiously. Gan Hong said softly, "Take good care of you and make you satisfied. No matter." She slightly bent down, and a charming and deep line faintly appeared at her collar, and her voice was even more gentle. "No matter what." "No matter what." Boss Luo nodded. "No matter what." Gan Hong was so gentle that she was like a female slave that only existed in ancient times. "Then let's sleep." Boss Luo nodded. Gan Hong was stunned. Then she smiled and said, "Sir, you are really direct. So, how do you want to sleep? Is it down there? Or is... Gan Hong lowered her head and directly fell asleep. Luaccio shook his head and slightly moved his arm outward, and Gan Hong's body was sent to the seat next to the aisle. If it's a surname Gan, it should be a big surname in Vietnam. A familiar voice sounded. After dealing with Gan Hong, Luaccio, who had just opened the book, heard Yu Ye's voice. Boss Luo closed the book and looked up. In the aisle of the carriage, Miss Maid was wearing a train attendant's outfit, pushing a dining car. After a long time, Boss Luo vaguely knew that Miss Maid had a hobby of dressing up. For example, when she went to other people's laboratories, she would wear a white coat, saying that it would be more suitable for the environment. "Sir, it's afternoon tea time. Do you need anything?" If he didn't know her, he would probably think that she was a high-quality train attendant in charge of the first-class cabin on this train. Boss Luo smiled and cooperated. "What do you have here?" Miss Maid smiled. "Kopwaka salad and tobacco rolls. As for drinks, we have special fruit tea or Ipanema coffee." Miss Maid opened the exquisite silver covers one by one, and then used 2 different cups to serve the fruit tea and coffee. Finally, she used an ordinary glass to pour a glass of water, and placed them one by one in front of Boss Luo. Napkins and tableware were also placed one by one. "Sir, please enjoy." Miss Maid, who disguised as a train attendant, nodded with a smile, and then left with the dining car. "Sit down. Since you are here, accompany me," Luaccio ordered. Originally, The amount inside was enough for 2 people to eat. Seeing the disguised servant girl sitting across the table, Luaccio asked with a smile, "I remember that I left in the morning, but didn't Master say that I can take care of everything in the restaurant now? Also, did Master ask me to remember to arrange the meal times so that I can taste the best?" "Well, and then?" Boss Luo asked with interest. Miss Mate said softly, "Only a meal with you is worth remembering." After opening the napkin, Luaccio nodded with a smile. "My uncle shouldn't be back so soon. Well, Miss Chef, don't you want to introduce the recipe of this tobacco roll to me?" "My pleasure." The train ran on the track. The roaring sound was actually rhythmic. The afternoon sun turned into mottled light blocks under the curtains. Flying green onions, leisurely time, and sleeping quietly, the original train attendant, Miss Gan Hong. Song Howren took a cup of coffee from a service desk in a back carriage. After passing by several carriages, he found Oni and Luvia. They had arrived earlier and were now sitting in a booth. There was another slightly older man sitting in the booth. Oni sat next to him. Seeing Song Howren coming, Oni stood up and pretended not to know him. "Excuse me, I want to go to the washroom." Song Howren shrugged and made way for Oni to pass. He sat down himself. He looked at the man inside and said indifferently, "I'm a little tired. Do you mind if I take a rest here?" The man said casually, "Whatever." Song Howren seemed to strike up a conversation at this time. "What's your occupation, sir?" The man's eyes flickered, seeming to be nervous, but his voice was calm, or deliberately calm. "Meat products, a small business. What about you?" "I'm running a farm," Song Howren said with a prideful tone. "Every animal in our farm is fed with the best feed, regularly checked and vaccinated. All the documents are complete. Of course, the price is slightly higher. However, it is definitely worth it." "Is that so?" The man nodded. "Does it include delivery?" "There is no service that cannot be bought with money. As long as you pay more, it can be delivered anywhere." Song Howren smiled and continued, "Of course, if it's going to space, there is nothing we can do." "How do you calculate it?" The man continued asking. Song Howren said coolly, "That depends on whether you want beef, mutton, or pork." "Cattle. How many?" "One is enough. Slaughter them all, get all the documents and procedures, then keep them in cold storage." "Address?" "Here." The man pulled out a card. "The rule in our farm is to pay half of the deposit. Is that okay with you?" Song Howren kept the card. "All right." At the same time, Luvia, who was seated opposite them, nonchalantly tidied up her clothes before leaving. However, before leaving, she retrieved a black briefcase from under the table. Not long after, Oni returned. Looking at Song Howren, who was still seated in his seat, he frowned and said, "Brother, this is my seat." Sorry, I can't get a seat ticket." Song Howren quickly stood up and apologized. "How about letting me sit opposite you? I see that young lady has already left. How about letting me sit for a while?" Scram. Oni squeezed out a ferocious expression. Song Howren quickly stood up and said, Okay, easy. ESYMAN. I'll leave now, okay?" No one cared, because many people were the same. Unable to buy a seat ticket, they only had a standing ticket. Thus, they began searching for the empty seats. When Song Howren returned, the female flight attendant named Gan Hong had just walked out from the first-class cabin. She rubbed her neck, a puzzled look on her face. Song Howren looked at her in surprise and then blinked his eyes. Gan Hong shook her head and gritted her teeth. "I am sorry, young master. I think I fell asleep." "Really fell asleep?" Song Howren blinked again. "This kid, can't you tell, really fell asleep? Not bad. You have quite the guts. It seems there is hope for you to have children." "Young master, actually, all right. You can go to your thing first." Song Howren waved his hand and said, "Go back and receive your reward." "No, young master. Actually, go. Song Howren continued waving his hand and pushed open the door and walked in. Seeing this, Gan Hong felt that there was a misunderstanding. However, she did not want to make it public. Thus, she quietly left. Song Howren walked back to his seat and patted Luaccio on the shoulder. "How was it? Good times?" "Something like that." Boss Luo smiled and lowered his head to read his book. Chapter 812. "God, I've sinned and offended God. Now, as God, for the love of God above all things, I repent my sins with all my heart. 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 I don't dare to offend God again. I hope God can forgive my sins. Amen. Sincerity. After that, Shalti clasped her hands together and continued to recite her scripture of remorse on the crucifix statue. The repeated actions of sincerity seemed to be unable to wash away the guilt in her heart. Her mind was filled with the color of that skin that she couldn't get rid of. It wasn't until the door of the auditorium suddenly opened and Shalti heard footsteps that she was startled. She quickly stood up and saw that it was Nanny Delan. "Shalti, my child, what happened to you? Why do you look so panicked?" Nanny Delan walked up to Shalti and gently pressed her forehead. "Nanny, I can't calm down." Shalti was too ashamed to say what she had done. She felt that not only was her sins unforgivable, but they were even more serious because she was lying to Nanny Delan, who had always loved her, taught her, and raised her. Poor child. Nanny Delan comforted her softly. She was the one who raised Shalti. Many years ago, this child was placed in front of the monastery when she was still an infant. It had been 17 years since then. How could Nanny Delan not know that Shalti seemed to be hiding something? However, her education philosophy didn't allow her to pursue the matter directly. Instead, she changed the topic. "I added some oil to the motorcycle and started it. God bless me, it can still drive. Later, send the child to the clinic in the village. While you're at it, go to the village police station and ask if there have been any missing children recently." "Yes, Nanny." Shalti nodded. But at this moment, Shalti suddenly widened her eyes and looked behind Nanny Delan with a bewildered expression. Behind Nanny Delan was naturally the entrance of the auditorium. Nanny Delan also followed Shalti's gaze. In front of the auditorium, the unconscious little girl had woken up at some point in time and was standing there at the moment. She was wearing a woman's white blouse that was not her size. Sia Erdi had helped her change into the clothes, but the buttons on the shirt were all unbuttoned. This child was basically naked with only a thin shirt on the outside. Her eyes were lifeless as she slowly walked towards the two of them. Half of the chain hanging from the necklace around her neck made a crisp clanking sound as she walked. She was still barefoot. "Child, you're awake?" Nanny Delan was pleasantly surprised. However, the young lady acted as though she didn't hear anything. She didn't seem to have any intention of stopping, even when she was in front of Senior Nurse Delan and Charlene. Shalti and Senior Servant Delon had no choice but to step aside and let her pass. She walked up to the crucifix and looked up at it. Then she stopped moving. Nanny Delan and Charty didn't know what had happened to the child. They just looked at her from aside and found that the little girl's face was a little strange. She seemed to be struggling with something. "Child, are you all right?" Senior Nurse Delan gently placed her palm on the little girl's shoulder and asked with concern. But this action seemed to have triggered a switch. The little girl's face suddenly turned ferocious, but it only lasted for a moment. "Don't touch me." She even waved her hand and slapped Senior Nurse Delan's palm away. Senior Nurse Delan was stunned. She didn't feel any pain from her palm being slapped away. Instead, she saw the little girl's dumbfounded expression. The little girl stared at her palm, dumbfounded. Then she clenched her fist again and again. In the end, she even waved her hand, opened her palm, and aimed at the statue of suffering in front of her. "Explode! Explode! Explode! Go to hell!" She shouted a few words. Senior Nurse Delan and Charlene looked at each other. They didn't know what the child wanted to do, but there was no doubt that she was doing something disrespectful. "Child, don't do this. You can't be disrespectful to God." Senior Nurse Delan was startled. She quickly pressed down the little girl's palm and grabbed her shoulders. At the same time, she began to recite scriptures silently, praying for forgiveness for the little girl's actions. At this moment, the little girl suddenly revealed a painful expression. Her shoulders that were grabbed felt like they were being roasted by fire, causing her body to tremble. "Stop reciting. Stop reciting." The little girl painfully struggled free from Nanny Delan's hands and then fell to the ground as if she had collapsed. Seeing this, Shalti could only help the little girl up with concern. However, the child's face was filled with doubt, and he didn't say a word. He turned his head and closed his eyes before falling down again. This made Senior Nurse Deland and Charty feel strange. They discussed for a while and decided to send the child to the village first. At the same time, they asked Charlene to buy some daily necessities. The sidecar was driving on the village road. Charlene covered the little girl with a blanket and focused on driving. The little girl opened her eyes slightly before closing them again. She did not make any movements. However, when the sidecar passed by a winding road, the little girl suddenly lifted the blanket on her body and jumped down. Then, she rolled down the winding road. Charlotte heard the commotion and looked back, just in time to see this thrilling scene. She quickly stopped the car. Before she could stop, she had arrived at the spot where the little girl had jumped down. She looked down, but could no longer see anyone. She cried out in panic. Her body rolled, and the world spun. Only after a long time did she stop. Little girl, Lucifer had never experienced such a terrible situation before. When she rolled down the hill, she felt as though her body was being hit by an ogre's hammer. She reached out to touch her cheek. It felt moist, blood was flowing out from her cheek. It was likely that she had been cut by the sharp grass while rolling down the hill. I've become so fragile. Lucifer frowned. Not only now, but not long ago when the old nanny grabbed her hands in the auditorium, Lucifer clearly realized how fragile she was now. The old nanny was naturally not a person with strong holy power. She had just been praying intently for many years, and some characteristics of holy power had naturally appeared in her body. At best, she had a seed of holy power in her body, and it was the kind of thing that would not germinate. But even so, she could still burn her body when she prayed. Lucifer gritted her teeth and got up from the ground. She grabbed the collar around her neck hard, trying to destroy it. Obviously, her powerful power was imprisoned because of the existence of this thing. I didn't expect that. Buggy didn't go to the lost area, but Lucifer couldn't help but show a trace of annoyance on her face. In addition, there was also a deep doubt. That place suddenly disappeared 100 years ago. Why did it suddenly appear into this remote place? She dragged her injured body and walked alone in the forest at the foot of the hill. Not long after, Lucifer saw a lumberjack at work. The lumberjack seemed to be surprised to see such a little girl walking barefoot, but seeing that she was injured, he hurried over. "Child, are you okay? What happened?" Lucifer frowned, thinking that now she could not move freely and her power was sealed. She was no different from an ordinary human child. However, as a demon, even if she had no power, deceit was still her nature. Although she was proud, she really disdained to deceive an ordinary person. But considering the current situation, there was really no other way. "Uncle, I accidentally fell off the cliff. Can you help me?" "Poor child, come with me." The lumberjack picked up Lucifer with concern. "What's your name? Where do you live?" "My name is Lucy. I live in the village." Lucifer gave the answer without thinking, intending to let the lumberjack take her to a crowded place. First, she needed to contact Charlotte, but just as she finished speaking, Lucifer felt like her brain was about to explode. A terrible black flame was burning her soul, making her whole body tremble. What's wrong with you?" The lumberjack saw that the little girl's face suddenly turned pale, as if she was suffering from some kind of pain. He hurriedly put the child down and didn't even care about why the child was wearing a collar. "I'm fine. Uncle, quickly take me to the village." Lucifer gritted her teeth. "Are you really okay?" The lumberjack frowned, but still asked, "Where do you live? I could take you back." "In the village. The first house in the front row of the village." Lucifer hugged her head tightly and rolled on the ground. The burning heat in her soul became more and more terrifying, making her feel like she was about to melt. Child, I'm fine." Lucifer panted and stood up shakily, her face even paler. She stared at the lumberjack, and countless thoughts flashed through her mind. Finally, she gritted her teeth and said, "Sorry, I lied to you. My house isn't in the village in front." Don't ask me questions. Take me to a crowded place. In short, I'll repay you," Lucifer said quickly, and then she fainted. Before she fainted, a thought that made Lucifer extremely depressed flashed through her mind. The punishment of lying had been imposed on her. Once she lied, she would suffer the punishment of her soul burning and a splitting headache. As the king of hell, she could only be an honest child. Chapter 8:13. "You're awake?" It was Shalti's voice. When Lucifer woke up, she found herself in a tent. There was the smell of soil and vegetation in the air, and there were a few men's clothes in the corner of the tent. Lucifer quickly determined that this tent belonged to the lumberjack she saw before she fainted. As for why Shalti appeared here, it was not difficult to deduce. Originally, in her injured state after rolling down the hill, she could not have walked far. It was not strange that Shalti had searched all the way and finally found her. At least I've met a good person. Lucifer couldn't help but laugh at himself. Of course, as a reverend mother of the monastery, if she wasn't a good person, Mother Mary's coffin lid wouldn't be able to cover it. Lucifer did not speak after waking up. She only looked sideways at Shalti. There was no doubt that in her current state, it was difficult for her to do anything. Even the idea of informing Charlotte and asking her to send someone to welcome her was a little dangerous. If the group of devils who succumbed to her power knew that the dignified queen of hell had become like this, those guys would probably be very enthusiastic about discussing how to eat her. Taking a step back, even if Charlotte's protection could allow her to avoid the threat of the devils who would follow their instincts, Lucifer would not choose to go back at this time, because her pride did not allow her to appear in this state. "I heard from Mr. Alma that you are called Lucifer, right? He said that your family lives in the village in front?" Shalti looked at Lucifer with a puzzled expression. "Alma, it should be the lumberjack's name." Lucifer nodded subconsciously. When she was about to speak, her head felt like it was about to split open. She quickly shook her head. She could not lie, and she could not admit to a lie, but it did not mean that she could not get out of this predicament. As long as she denied the lie she had already told and remained silent, she could easily deal with the punishment that was imposed on her like a curse. Or perhaps he could use an ambiguous explanation to avoid the activation of this punishment. After Lucifer nodded, she quickly shook her head. She intended to remain silent in response to Shalti's questions. As for how to communicate, it was naturally left to this young nanny to worry about. In any case, this kind of pure-hearted nun would have enough patience and tolerance to tolerate an uncooperative child. That was what Lucifer thought. "Isn't that so? Then what was your original name? Where do you live?" Shalti asked curiously. Lucifer shook her head again. Just as she was considering if she should simply pretend to be a child with amnesia, it would be more convenient, but her head suddenly began to explode with pain. How could this be? When faced with a question, not answering it shouldn't be considered lying. But why was the punishment still activated? Could it be? Lucifer suddenly opened her eyes wide, revealing a shocked and angry expression, because she thought of a very terrible thing. The condition for activating the punishment of lying curse was most likely not as simple as lying. Instead, it was a more complicated command. For example, you must answer the other party's question with the truth. Not lying, answer 2 activation conditions at the same time. Damn it, you actually hit me so hard. Lucifer gritted her teeth. I didn't participate in the siege 100 years ago. This is not fair. Siege? Fair? What are you talking about? Shalti was confused. What did you just say? Don't ask. You won't know even if I tell you. Lucifer stared coldly at Shalti. At the same time, her palms were sweaty, because she didn't know whether the punishment on her had more conditions other than the one she deduced. Fortunately, such an answer didn't seem to trigger the activation of the punishment. Lucifer couldn't help but secretly sigh in relief. That's weird. The damned headache once again assaulted her head, giving her the urge to smash her own head into pieces. You must answer the other party's question with the truth. How are you, child? Lucifer's painful expression made Shalti panic. She was at a loss as she hugged Lucifer in her arms. Nanny Delon said that hugs could give people hope and strength. Listen, I will only say this once, Lucifer said weakly. I'm the queen of hell, Lucifer. The siege 100 years ago was an attack on a magical shop. Most of the leaders were descendants of the Protoss from Western Europe. What? Shalty blinked her eyes. She let go of Lucifer a little, then lowered her head and pressed it against Lucifer's forehead, muttering to herself, "You don't have a fever?" Lucifer suddenly wanted to find something to destroy, but she estimated that in her current state, the most she could do was to trample on the grass outside. "In short, your name is Lucifer, right?" Lucifer nodded, feeling hopeless. "How did you get to the monastery?" Shalty continued to ask. Lucifer said, "I fell from the sky. I didn't expect to fall into the monastery." "Then what about the collar on your neck?" Shalty blinked her eyes again. Lucifer said, "It should be used to seal my power. I met an extremely powerful opponent and couldn't defeat him." Shalty suddenly sighed and looked at Lucifer with a caring gaze. She then shook her head and said, "Child, take a rest first. I'll bring you something to eat." "Wait, I'm telling the truth." Seeing that Shalty had already walked out of the tent, Lucifer finally swallowed his words. He felt hopeless. "Is the child awake?" Outside the tent, the lumberjack Amma had started a fire and was using the simple utensils he brought with him to cook a pot of meat soup. Lumberjacks like Amma had to stay for a few days after entering the forest, so it was not unusual for him to bring cooking utensils with him. "Yes, she's awake," Shalty sighed, "but I don't know if it's because she hit her head, but I feel like there's something strange about her." Shalty briefly told her what she heard in the tent. When the lumberjack Amma heard that, he opened his mouth in shock. Then he laughed out loud and said, "My child sometimes calls himself Superman, too. Children at this age tend to be more imaginative." "That's true, but if we can't find out where she lives, it won't be easy to deal with this," Shalty said worriedly. Amma was an old man, around 40 years old. Because he had a child at home, he seemed to have some experience in this aspect. He comforted Shalty. "It's fine. I heard you say that when you found the child, she must have encountered something terrible before, or else she would have been put on a collar by someone." "Oh, I really don't know what she went through before. Poor child. Maybe she said those words just to protect herself." "I hope so," Shalty nodded. Amma said, "But if you want to send her to the village, I'm afraid it won't be possible in the short term." Shalty was stunned. "Why?" Uncle Mu said, "Wasn't there a terrible storm yesterday? The road out of the village was flooded by landslides, so it's impassable now." "How come?" Shalty was stunned. At this moment, Amma suddenly looked behind Shalty, where the tent was, and shouted in astonishment, "Child, child!" Shalty hurriedly turned around and saw Lucifer's small figure running quickly into the forest. The sky was already dark, so she couldn't see him at once. "Damn, wild beasts will appear in the forest at night." Amma suddenly panicked. Without saying a word, he picked up an axe and chased after him. Shalty also lifted her skirt and followed him all the way. Kata Club. The city's blackout also affected the rich's gold-consuming lair. Therefore, the security guards in front of the club were somewhat listless. When Arnold and Carell arrived at the entrance of Kata Club, they could see a bit of light coming from inside. However, the surroundings were still mainly black, presumably because of the small generator inside the club. "How are we going to get in?" Arnold pulled Caroline in front of the club, fearing that she would go straight up like she did in the White Hell bar earlier. Obviously, a place for the rich like Kata Club was completely incomparable to that kind of low-class bar. He was afraid that Caroline would be directly kicked out. Caroline suddenly looked at Arnaud and said, "Can't you go in?" Arnold was stunned and then shook his head. "How can I go in such a place? The cost is too high." Caroline also shook her head. "Who said you can go in and spend money? I mean, let you swagger in. You forgot that when you were in front of the bar, that guy thought you were Haley." With that, Caroline directly took off Arnold's glasses. At the same time, she reached out and fiddled with Arnold's bookish hair. "Well, it looks like you have some potential to be a duck." "But Arnold hurriedly wanted to say something. Caroline had already pushed his shoulder and walked toward the door of Kata Club. "Since Haley has a job inside, then the people here must know him. Maybe we can find Haley's whereabouts. Maybe Haley may be in the club now. But I really don't know how to," Arnold said in a panic. However, at this time, the The security guard in front of Kata Club had obviously noticed two sneaky people approaching. He directly walked over with a flashlight. "You two, what are you doing? This place is closed today. Let's go." "Oh, it's Haley." With the back of the light, the two couldn't clearly see the face of the security guard, but obviously the other party had clearly seen them. Hearing the security guard's words, Arnold had a sigh, then glanced at Caroline and hesitantly replied, "Well, it's me." The security guard quickly walked over and pressed the flashlight at the same time. "Haley, where have you been this month? You didn't come to work. The supervisor told me that if you don't show up next week, I'll clean your cupboard. I have something to do recently, so I went back to my hometown." Arnold tried his best to turn his face away, as if he didn't dare to look at the security guard. The security guard was stunned, then looked at Caroline and asked curiously, "Who is this young lady?" She is," Caroline said indifferently. "I'm his employer. I heard that this place is fun, so I asked him to bring me here. I didn't expect that. It's really not open." Hearing this, the security guard showed a tacit smile to Arnold, then said politely, "Yes, young lady, there's a power outage today, so we can't open. Even the air conditioner in the security booth can't be turned on. I'm sweating all over because of the heat." "That's a pity." Caroline shook her head with a look of disdain. "It seems that this place is not good." The security guard didn't say anything. It was their motto not to offend customers. In fact, this beautiful girl was nothing compared to some of the old and bad-tempered middle-aged women in this club. Sorry. The security guard smiled cheekily. Caroline suddenly said at this time, "Haley, since the door is not open, you go in and get your things back. Let's drive later. I want to run around Bread Mountain." Take things?" Arnold almost bit Caroline's ear. "I don't have anything to take. Just take it. Look at what's in the cupboard. Maybe you can find some clues." Caroline lowered her voice. In the eyes of the security guard, the way the two of them whispered in each other's ears was like an intimate game between a couple, so he didn't care. In fact, the gigolos in the Kata Club were very good at pleasing women. But I don't have the key. How can I take it?" Arnold couldn't help but show a bitter face. Unexpectedly, Caroline suddenly shouted at this time, "What? You forgot to take the key? Are you an idiot? I came here with you to play, but you didn't take the key? I have so much money to raise you. It's better to raise a male dog." Seeing the woman swinging her handbag at Arnold, the security guard sighed inwardly. Although these cowherds were well-fed and well-dressed, they were, after all, for women to play with, so they were no different from male dogs. "It doesn't matter. There's a spare key in the security room. I'll open it for you." The security guard hurriedly said, "Don't hurt your friendship because of these trivial things." "Then why don't you go? Why are you standing there like a block of wood?" At this moment, Calorie patted Arnold's shoulder with her handbag. She looked like a spoiled brat. "Haley, come on. Don't waste your time." The security guard pulled Arnold's arm, walking into the Kata Club. "Go, I'll wait for you here. Come out quickly." Caroline's voice came from behind. The security guard threw a pitiful look at Arnold, sighing, "Brother, you were right. It's really hard to be in your line of work." Ha, is that so?" Arnaud smiled embarrassedly and looked back at Caroline. Chapter 8:14. "Haley, where are you going?" "The locker room is over here." The security guard pointed to the side. Before that, Haley seemed to have walked in the wrong direction. When Arnold heard that, he subconsciously adjusted his glasses. But when he did that, he realized that his glasses had been taken away by Caroline. He immediately rubbed his nose and hurriedly said, "I know. I just want to go to the toilet." The security guard shrugged and said, "There's a bathroom in the locker room." "Huh? Really?" "Yeah, there's one in there." "Huh." Arnold nodded. "Haley." Unexpectedly, the security guard suddenly stared at Arnold without blinking and walked up to him. "Don't tell me it's you. What's wrong with me?" Arnold tilted his head. "Don't tell me it's you." The security guard's body was about to press on him, which made Arnold subconsciously step back. In the end, he directly leaned against the wall. The security guard suddenly said, "Don't tell me you're thinking of stealing the bar now." "Steal the wine?" Arnold was stunned. The security guard looked around and lowered his voice. "Let me tell you, the supervisor found that a lot of good wine is missing. I don't know who told him that someone secretly took the wine here to sell for money." "Bro, I haven't done anything for a long time. You just came back." Don't ask for trouble. Oh, oh, okay. Thank you. Arnold nodded. The security guard smiled this time. Well, hurry up and get the things. Go back and greet your boss. By the way, Haley, do you look a little different? Do I? Arnold pushed the door open and walked in, leaving the security guard with his back. Maybe my hair is a little longer. I haven't had a haircut recently. Is that so? The security guard shrugged and didn't care. He quickly unlocked the locker in Haley's locker room and poked his head in. He seemed to be curious about what was inside. However, Arnold closed the door of the cabinet and looked at the security guard at the same time. The security guard laughed and whistled as he walked away. I'll wait for you outside. Hurry up. Arnold nodded, then shone his flashlight into the cabinet. He saw that there was a black bag in the cabinet, so he used the bag to put everything inside, regardless of size. After a final check, he made sure that he did not miss anything. Not long after, a new awe went out of the door. The security guard was smoking outside. Seeing Haley come out, he accompanied him out of the kata club, talking and laughing. Caroline seemed to be a little impatient from waiting. She walked up with a sullen expression, causing the security guard to gloat for a while. Brother, you're on your own now. The security guard patted him on the shoulder and returned to the security booth with a flashlight. When Arnaud saw Caroline walking in front of him, he patted the bag in his hand, indicating that he had taken something. Caroline nodded at this time, seemingly relieved. Arnold suddenly whispered, "The Oscars owe you an Oscar." Caroline rolled her eyes at Arnold and snatched the bag from his hand. Then she lowered her voice and said, "Let's get out of here quickly." Arnold nodded. The two quickly left while the street lights were not on. They planned to check the things in the bag in the safe place. Unexpectedly, not long after they left, several men in short-sleeved shirts appeared in front of them. The men directly blocked their way. Bumped into a robber? This was Caroline's first thought, but she quickly denied it. This was because the locals were rarely robbed. Generally speaking, only foreigners or tourists would encounter more robberies. What do you want to do? After all, Caroline was also a person with a gray income. At least she would not panic completely. One of the men sneered. You finally dare to show up, Haley? Catch them. The man suddenly waved his hand, and several big men rushed up at the same time. In a few seconds, they directly restrained Arnold and Caroline, making them unable to struggle. What do you want to do? Let me go. Let me go. Caroline wanted to bite the person who caught her, but soon her head and upper body were covered with a bag. She could only hear screams. It was Arnold's screams. He seemed to be beaten by these men. I'm not Haley. I'm really not. Be asterisk starred. You swallowed our things. Do you think we can't do anything to you if you don't show up? Take her away. Bring her back. I'll take care of this guy and make him spit it out for me. Caroline became more and more frightened. She couldn't see anything. She could only feel herself being pulled around. In the end, she seemed to have gotten into a car. Then, someone reached in and covered her nose. This hand was also holding a towel. She smelled the scent of almonds and then fainted. Chee-chee, chee-chee, chee-chee. The car radio could only emit an electric sound, no matter which channel it was tuned to. Orphe shook her head and simply turned off the car stereo. The situation on the road was very bad. The power outage caused the red streetlights on the main road to stop working. Now, they could only rely on the traffic police to temporarily direct the traffic. It would be strange if the road conditions were good. The car stopped on the road. Orphe picked up a bottle of mineral water and took a sip in annoyance. Then, he casually threw it on the passenger seat. The bottle hit something. It was a work permit with Orphe's face on it. It was his identity. He was the country's Minister of Security. After several persuasions from the secretary, Orphe finally stopped the work at hand and planned to go home to rest for a while, take a shower, and change clothes. But he felt that his time would be wasted on this congested road. At this time, Orphe's phone suddenly rang. Because he had been in the control center of the Ministry of Security, the strange pulse during the storm outside did not affect his phone. Hello, this is Orphe. Orphe activated the Bluetooth. Barbara, what's the matter? The caller was Barbara, a Filipino made hire by him. Oh, he heard Barbara say happily. God, Mr. Orphe, I finally got through to you. It seems that the communication has been restored. I have been looking for you. Some areas should have started to recover. I happen to be in the service area, Orphe said casually. Tell me, what's the matter? Sir, the school is closed. I brought Louis back from the dormitory and just coaxed him to sleep, Barbara said dutifully. Sir, you haven't been home for a few days. I want to ask you, are you coming back tonight? If not, then I won't get off work. Oh, I'm sorry, Barbara. I'm too busy. Orphe pinched his eyebrows. How about this? I should be home soon. When I come back, you can get off work. Sir, do I need to prepare dinner for you? No, I'm not hungry. You can pack up. When I come back, you can leave, Orphe said casually. Then he asked about Louis. The child was sent to a full-time school. He usually stayed in the dormitory and could only go home during the holidays. Of course, it was not a holiday now, but it was normal for the school to have a power outage. Louis is very obedient. He doesn't make a fuss. He just wants you to come back early. Barbara sighed and said, Sir, you know, Louis is too young. You're so busy, and Dr. Frange often doesn't come back. Louis will feel lonely. Thank you for your hard work, Barbara. Orphe did not seem willing to talk about this topic. He quickly said, I'm driving. Let's talk later. Wait for me to come back. Then, I'll go home first. I want to go back and take a look too. In front of the apartment, Barbara, who was almost 40 years old, nodded at Orphe and left on her bicycle. After watching her leave, Orphe yawned and returned to his room. He went upstairs and came to his son Louis's room. Orphe entered Louis's room quietly. He did not turn on the lights. He just used the light from the corridor to come to the bed. He lowered his head and kissed his sleeping son's forehead. Then, he put the child's arm under the blanket. However, he felt something under the blanket. Orphe took it out. It was a photo frame. Orphe's expression was somewhat complicated. Finally, he sighed and put the photo frame on the bedside table. Then, he closed the door and left. He went downstairs. The electricity in this residential area had been restored. Orphe took out a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge and drank most of it. He was going to take a shower. But at this time, he heard something. The door of the house was opened. He frowned and came to the living room. He saw a figure stagger in, holding a bottle of half-drunk wine in his hand. Then, he directly sat at the entrance and changed his shoes. He looked drunk. This person was none other than Dr. Frankie. How did you come back? Orphe walked to Dr. French. However, he did not seem to intend to help him up. He just stood there. Hearing the sound, Dr. French raised his head. His eyes were half open and half closed. He seemed to be in a daze. Dr. French burped. Orphe, oh, you came back. With that, Dr. French supported himself against the wall and stood up with difficulty. However, he suddenly lost his balance and was about to fall to the ground. Orphe frowned and reached out to stop him. Then he directly dragged him to the sofa in the living room. He pushed Dr. French directly to the sofa. Look at you. Classes were suspended, and Barra had brought Louis back. So, quickly get rid of the smell of alcohol on you. I don't want Louis to think that his grandfather is a drunk. For a moment, Dr. French seemed to be stiff. However, he quickly turned over and lay directly on the sofa. Then, he closed his eyes and fell asleep. Orphe gritted his teeth. There seemed to be a nameless fire rising in him. However, he had no way to vent it. He paced back and forth in the living room. He walked very fast. Finally, he wiped his face with both hands and sat down again. The single-seater sofa was only an arm's length away from the sofa. He looked at Dr. French, who reeked of alcohol. He knew that this old man was not really asleep. The day before yesterday, you met Billy at the theater. Why did you do that? Orphe frowned and asked. Although he already had some guesses in his heart, he still wanted to hear Dr. French's answer with his own ears. However, the doctor still did not move at this time. It was as if he had fallen asleep. Orphe wiped his face again. Actually, even if you don't say it, I can guess a little. Right now, the government won't take out money to support your project. At least, not in the next few years. Billy is planning to sponsor you, right? That's right. If we can really launch a satellite that belongs to us, it will have a great impact on the future situation. The sound of snoring came from the doctor. Orphe sneered. Looking at you now, you probably got the cold shoulder from Billy, right? Now that the head of the Senate is dead, the various factions will have to reshuffle. There is also the case of the theater, which made this year's leaders very anxious. This was a very good opportunity for those who were not in the public eye. Give up. With this opportunity, Billy won't invest a lot of money on you for the time being. Don't think that those politicians are so patriotic, wholeheartedly trying to suck up to others' cold butts. The doctor's snoring sound seemed to have gotten heavier. A.O. Faye heaved a heavy sigh. She leaned against the back of the sofa and looked at the ceiling. After a long silence, she slowly said, "I know that's your dream. But we are only mortals after all. There are some things that we can't do, so let's give up. Letting go of yourself is also letting go of others." Back then, if you hadn't insisted on carrying out the launch test, that kind of thing wouldn't have happened. The snoring sound suddenly became lighter. Every time Lewis asked me where my mother went, I didn't tell him the truth. Orphe looked at Dr. French's back and said bitterly, "What do you think I can tell him? Tell him that his mother, your student, my wife, because of my grandfather's arbitrary and stubborn decision, strongly insisted on launching an unstable rocket without obtaining all the safety data. In the end, it caused the entire—" "Forget it." Orphe suddenly stood up. "Just keep sleeping in your own dream and don't wake up. Anyway, after so many years, I've already gotten used to it. But I beg you, what you research is your business, but you'd better not get involved in this whirlpool of power. You're not young anymore. If you want to retire, you can do so at any time. I'm going to take a shower. I have to go back later. There have been a lot of things recently." The president gave a strict order. Orphe walked upstairs. "The school is on holiday for 2 days. Lewis is at home. If you have time, accompany him. If you don't have time, I'll ask Barbara to come over earlier. That's all. Good night." The sound of footsteps going upstairs gradually faded away. Only a wall lamp was left in the living room. He was curled up on the sofa like a homeless person on the street. Chapter 8:15. She could vaguely hear a painful groan. Caroline slowly opened her eyes and found herself sitting on the ground. The surroundings were dim and even a little stuffy. This was like a factory, a simple factory transformed from a civilian house. There were a lot of beakers, test tubes, alcohol lamps, and the like. An unpleasant smell assailed her nose, like the smell of hospital disinfectant mixed with gasoline. Caroline woke up at once. She clearly saw that her ankles were tied with plastic tape. Her hands were tied behind her back at this time. Caroline struggled quickly, but her struggling body soon stopped because her vision once again found something that frightened her. There was no doubt that she saw Arnaud. Arnaud was being hung up at this moment. He could only barely touch the ground with the tips of his feet when he stood on tiptoe. He lowered his head. His hair was scattered, his body was full of sweat, and there were visible bruises on his arms. Beside Arnaud, 2 men in fancy shirts were holding slender iron pipes in their hands. Caroline's breathing suddenly quickened. She knew that before she woke up, Arnaud had probably been beaten for a long time. Otherwise, Arnaud would not look so weak. I really don't know. I'm not Haley." Caroline could only vaguely hear Arnaud's voice, like a weak person who had been pressed under a collapsed building for several days and nights. A man grabbed Arnaud's hair at this time and sneered. "Twins? You're the younger brother? Are you kidding me? When you took the money from us before, why didn't you say that you have a younger brother and ask us to send him some money? Do you think you can fool us with a fake ID? Haley, are you an idiot? Even if you want to pretend to be another person, please go for plastic surgery first, okay? I've long known that you are an idiot with a brain problem, but I didn't expect you to be such an idiot." With that said, the man spat at Arnaud, turned around, and then slammed his elbow into Arnaud's chest. Caroline clearly saw that Arnaud spat out a mouthful of blood because of this impact. Arnaud was motionless, and his head hung down naturally. She didn't know if he had fainted or not. "Boss Boston," that woman woke up. Everyone looked at Caroline at the same time, and she subconsciously shrank her body. The man who seemed to be the boss, Boston, walked towards Caroline with a knife in his hand. The man squatted in front of Caroline and gently patted her cheek with the knife in his hand, which made her feel even more uncomfortable. However, she did not dare to speak for fear of angering these vicious fellows. The boss's nose twitched slightly. Caroline knew very well what this action meant. The boss, Boston, might be a drug addict. Thinking of the tools and equipment placed in this place, Caroline, who had always lived in a chaotic place, already had some guesses in her heart. This might be, I'm afraid, a small workshop for making drugs. What's your relationship with him? The boss suddenly asked. I have nothing to do with him. I've known him for less than 3 days, Caroline said nervously. Boston nodded and suddenly retracted his hand holding the knife. Caroline subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief, but unexpectedly, Boston suddenly stabbed with the knife. The tip of the knife brushed past Caroline's cheek and then nailed her to the wall behind her. Caroline was so frightened that her eyes widened, and she was so nervous that she didn't move. I'll ask you again. What's your relationship with Hiley? Where is he hiding? Boston's eyes widened. I don't know what he is. I really have nothing to do with him. Caroline was so frightened that she didn't hide anything. She almost directly told the whole story. Boston frowned and finally sneered. It's a waste that you two don't become screenwriters. However, you're still so stubborn even when you're about to die. I admire you. I'm telling the truth. If you don't believe me, you can check it out and ask. Caroline hurriedly said. The boss directly grabbed Caroline's hair, and the pulling feeling between her hair and her scalp made Caroline frown in pain. This Boston seemed to be in a very manic state, and his gaze became more and more fierce. He put the knife directly on Caroline's neck, and the sharp blade cut the skin on her neck. Caroline's breathing suddenly quickened. Listen, I don't have time to play tricks with you here. Boston grinned. You only have 2 paths. Obediently spit out all my goods, or let me chop you up and feed you to the dogs. I really don't know. Hiley. I don't know anything. Caroline cried in horror. Why did she encounter so many things? Since that night, when she followed Livia to Boss Neymar's villa, her life had been a mess. She had escaped danger once, but why did danger come again? Don't know. The boss roared. He grabbed Caroline's arm and dragged her on the floor. I'll make sure you don't know how you died. He threw her out and then said fiercely, Chop her up. This woman knows our things. It's useless to keep her. I don't believe that Hiley will still be stubborn in the end. Humph. You dare to swallow my things. I'll make sure you have a life to take them, but not the life to spend them. The 2 men directly picked up the machete and walked to Caroline. Caroline curled up in fear. Her mind was in a mess, and she only hoped to survive. Facing the machetes of the 2 ferocious men, Caroline begged for mercy. Don't kill me. I'm really not lying. I didn't know Hiley before. I was even involved in a murder case because of him. The police want to arrest me. You can go and ask. The 2 men directly dragged Caroline outside, not listening to her at all. Caroline shouted frantically, Don't kill me. Don't kill me. I can give you money. I'll give you money. The 2 men had already dragged Caroline to the door and seemed to have no intention of stopping. But Caroline still didn't intend to give up. You just want money. You can't get anything by killing me, and you even killed people. Don't kill me, and I can still give you money. Do you want to get nothing? Wait. Boston suddenly shouted. He walked up to Caroline again, looked down at her, and sneered. How much can you pay for your own life? Caroline thought of the huge bank card she had, but the money had disappeared. She opened her mouth. 300,000. 300,000, that's a lot. The boss sneered and waved his hand. Wait. 500,000. 500,000. 1 million. 1 million. Caroline almost shouted out her limit. Her savings, the house in the slums, and all kinds of loans with high interest. Maybe 1 million was enough, but this was the limit she could gather. 2 million, you can buy your life. The boss directly doubled the price. This is the interest for you snatching my things. I can let you go temporarily. 2 million. Impossible. Caroline retorted. Miss, are you going to bargain with me at this time? The boss suddenly smiled. Caroline finally gave up bargaining. She just wanted to get out of this danger as soon as possible. But I need some time. Boston warned, you'd better not play any tricks. With that, he waved his hand. You too. Follow her to get the money. Come back immediately after you get the money. Get up, little girl. If you want to live, move quickly. Don't let us wait too long. The man with the machete directly covered Caroline. Wait, you, what are you going to do to him? Caroline looked at Arnold nervously at this time. Arnold raised his head with difficulty and looked at her with pleading eyes. His lips moved slightly, as if to say, "Save him." Caroline quickly averted her gaze, not daring to look at Arnaud. She warned herself that Arnaud had nothing to do with her. He has nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me. No relationship. Boston sneered and gave the answer. I don't care if he is Haley or Haley's younger brother. In short, Haley swallow my things. I don't believe in twins. As long as he doesn't spit it out, don't even think about leaving. Of course, you can redeem him if you want. Give me money. My goods are worth at least $8 million. I don't have that much. Caroline finally lowered her head and glanced at Arnold quietly. Arnold had already lowered his head, and his face was ashen. Caroline didn't know how she got out of this place. When she came out, her eyes were covered with a black cloth. When the black cloth was untied, she was already on the street. But there were two more men beside her. They sandwiched her in the middle, one on the left and one on the right. One of the men even locked her with handcuffs. Their arms were handcuffed together and covered with a piece of clothing. They looked like a couple. Caroline knew that she couldn't chop them off. As long as she shouted on the street, the other man next to her could kill her in an extremely short time. Soon after, under the two men's hostage, Caroline returned to the slum where she was. Caroline once took the two men to her home by taking different routes. The stairs where the grocery store was located. But she didn't see the magical store. Only the old lady from the grocery store waved at her as a greeting. All the way back to Caroline's home. One of the men looked at Caroline's house and suddenly whistled. It turns out to be a prostitute. No wonder you can buy your own life with money. It seems that you have earned a lot. With that said, he walked toward Caroline, reached out, and pinched her face. There's still some time. Help me have some fun, okay? Of course, Caroline wasn't afraid to let this person take her. In other words, if the problem could be solved with one shot, it wasn't a problem at all. If one shot couldn't solve it, then 2 shots. The key was that this wasn't a problem that could be solved with many shots. Don't waste time. Hurry up and get the money. The other man shook his head, but he didn't untie Caroline's handcuffs. Okay, where is the money? Caroline had to take the two men into her room and then took away a painting hanging on the wall of the room. There was a secret compartment carved out by hand. Caroline took out a bag from the secret compartment and opened it. She looked at the bills inside, which were old and new. She gritted her teeth and handed them over with trembling hands. How much is here? 387,300. Caroline timidly reported the exact number. 380,000? The man sneered. Are you going to pay in installments? I can sell this house. I can still borrow money. I know a lot of people who can borrow money. I can still give me a little more time. Please, give me a little more time. Caroline begged. The man suddenly went out to make a phone call. Not long after, he came back and said indifferently, Boss said to take the money and get rid of this woman. 380,000 will be the fee for your hard work. Understood. Wait, I can get a sum of money. I can really get it. Give me some time. Caroline said in horror, If you kill me now, there will only be 380,000. But give me some time. I can give you enough. Really. Trust me. I don't want to die, so I will definitely think of a way, right? The man made another phone call and soon had an answer. Okay, I'll give you another chance. But you can only do it under our nose. Caroline nodded, then swallowed her saliva and took her phone from the man's hand. After unlocking it, she took out a card and asked the man to call the number on the card. Only when the call got through did she return it to her hand. Hello, Lawyer Carlo? It's me, Caroline. Caroline looked nervously at the two men in front of her, then lowered her voice and continued to speak into the phone about Nia's house. I promise you, but I hope to make a move as soon as possible, and I want 2 million. Not long after, Caroline ended the call. How is it? The man looked at her coldly. Caroline said nervously, He said no problem, but let's talk about it. Then what are you waiting for? The two men shrugged and carried Caroline out of the door. They smiled and said, "Miss, from now on, we are your agents." Caroline was helpless and could only be at the mercy of the other party. After going downstairs, the three were surprised to see two policemen coming this way. The two men took Caroline aside and watched the two police officers go straight upstairs. "It seems that you really got into trouble." He looked at Caroline and frowned. Caroline said bitterly, "I really didn't kill anyone." "Why not?" The other man had a smirk on his face and pinched Caroline's face. "The number of people you killed is probably more than the population of the earth." This was a joke, but Caroline couldn't laugh at all. The train arrived at the station. Song Howard stepped out of the train door first with Luaccio, then turned around, opened his hand, and smiled at Luaccio. "Welcome to Sao Paulo. Then welcome to come again in a few hours." Luaccio responded casually. According to the schedule, they were going to the airport immediately and wouldn't stay for long. "That's why I said, you really don't have a sense of humor." Song Howard shook his head. "Later, Oni and the others will take you around here for a few hours before arriving at the airport. We will meet at the airport." Luaccio asked curiously, "Do you have anything else?" Song Howard showed a mysterious smile, turned and walked into the crowd. "Don't miss me too much." He walked away in a carefree manner. "Mr. Luo, the car has been arranged." Luvia came out from the back of the carriage and went directly to Luaccio's side, whispering. Oni, on the other hand, was at the back and was looking around. Although he appeared frivolous, he was observing his surroundings. Not far away, a woman lowered her head and wore a hat to cover her face. She quickly left behind Oni. If someone were to look at her from the front, they would recognize that this woman was the flight attendant from not too long ago, gone home. Boss Luo acted as if he didn't see it and nodded to Luvia. "You can arrange the route. I'll leave the rest to you, Miss Luvia. Please come with me." Luvia didn't say much and walked straight ahead, while Oni followed from behind. The two of them, one in front and one behind, protected Luaccio in the middle. They gave off the feeling of bodyguards. Suddenly, the crowd was in an uproar. On the left, a group of passengers who had just gotten off the train ran in horror. The crowd instantly charged toward Luaccio's group. Luvia and Oni moved quickly, one retreating while the other moved forward, protecting Luaccio. Their expressions became tense. "What happened?" Luaccio asked. Luvia shook her head and said, "I don't know, but you can rest assured that it is not aimed at us. Maybe something unexpected happened over there." The charging crowd quickly dispersed, leaving a lot of empty space. Boss Luo, Luvia, and Oni were able to see the cause of the commotion. Not far away, at a place around 20 meters away, a man was grabbing another man and biting his neck. Blood sprayed out from the man's neck. The man who was bitten quickly pushed the other man away and fell to the ground in horror. As for the man who had bitten the other man, his body began trembling in a strange manner. He even issued out a roar. His body suddenly stiffened and his face contorted into an abnormally ferocious expression. He abruptly slammed into the door of the train. Then he bounced off and fell to the ground. However, he appeared to be fine. He quickly got up and put on an even crazier expression. Once again, he slammed into the door of the train. His mouth was filled with blood. His eyes rolled up and his movements were stiff. He roared, just like a zombie. At that moment, Luvia frowned. Seemingly having figured something out, she quickly said, "Tisk, another fellow who took zombie bath salts." "Zombie bath salts?" Boss Luo was stunned. Oni shrugged and said, "It is a new type of central nervous system stimulant. It has only recently become popular. Those who have taken it will become abnormally excited. Then, their actions will resemble those of the zombies in the movies. There, look at this man." Chapter 8:16. To Luaccio's surprise, the driver was Luvia instead of Oni. In the rearview mirror, he could see that Luvia frequently looked at Luaccio in the back seat. The car had already left the station. For the time being, there was no way to know how the drug addict was dealt with. "Mr. Luo, are you scared?" "With you here, I don't think so." Luaccio shook his head. Oni turned around directly and said casually, "Things like what happened just now are very common here. We're used to it." Luaccio nodded to show his understanding. and then asked curiously, Mr. Oni just said, zombie bath salts, right? Why? You're not interested in this kind of thing, are you? Oni blinked. Luvia instantly looked at Luacio's face in the rearview mirror, observing his expression. Luacio thought for a while. I'm just curious. Generally speaking, addictive drugs will bring harm. This is a well-known fact, and it's normal for people who seek thrills to ignore everything. But isn't this zombie bath salts a bit too extreme? Oni put his hands behind his head, looked at the blue sky on the roof skylight, and said carelessly, no matter how extreme the thrill-seeking people are, in my opinion, they're not as extreme as the people who make this kind of thing. From the very beginning, these addictive drugs were originally used for treatment. It's a kind of medical gospel, right? But who would have thought that thousands of years later, this kind of thing would become a deadly thing that endangers the whole world? It's like the weapons in our hands. Oni suddenly whistled. The primitive people began to make weapons just to protect their homes. But the development of weapons is also getting more and more advanced, and their power is getting stronger and stronger. Now, it's even so huge that it can destroy human beings. That's true. Luacio smiled slightly. Oni shrugged and looked out of the window. Not sure if it was a coincidence or some other reason. A woman on the street suddenly went mad and crashed into the nearby passersby. She looked almost the same as the crazy man at the station. But are there more of these things? Luvia frowned and seemed to be talking to herself. At this time, Oni suddenly rubbed his chin as if he remembered something. Luvia, speaking of which, Sao Paulo seems to be Buggy's territory, right? Luvia suddenly shot a cold glance at Oni. It was only then that Oni realized that Song Howard's VIP was sitting behind them. Oni did not know if this VIP was from the same world as them. It was better to say less about the underground world. Oni suddenly stretched his body and said, I'm going to take a nap. Call me when we're there. Luvia looked at the rearview mirror again and saw that Luacio seemed to have not heard anything. He was looking at the street with great interest, occasionally smiling. He was really a quiet big boy, different from the military counselor. However, Luvia suddenly became distracted. Song Howard's side profile and Luacio's side profile seemed to be quite similar. Maybe it was just an illusion? On a bustling street in the same city, Song Howard was sitting in the corner of an open-air tea house, playing with his mobile phone while drinking a drink. He looked very leisurely. At this time, a fashionably dressed woman walked over and sat down directly. She called out to Song Howard, young master. Oh, Gan Hong, you're here. Song Howard did not raise his head and continued playing with his mobile phone. You haven't eaten anything yet, right? No. The woman shook her head quickly. Song Howard suddenly revealed a mischievous smile and said, Actually, you can rest for a bit. After all, you have just lost your virginity. It is normal for you to have trouble moving around, young master. I told you I don't know how I fell asleep. I didn't sleep with him. This woman, Gan Hong, was greatly embarrassed. That mister, he didn't do anything to me. Is that so? Song Howard narrowed his eyes and said, If so, you will have to work harder next time. After all, this is an order from father. Gan Hong gritted her teeth and said, I understand. Song Howard continued, If you can get pregnant, your identity will be completely different. When the time comes, who knows, we might be able to find some clues about your hometown. Under the table, Gan Hong's fingers clenched together slightly. Song Howard casually tossed his mobile phone onto the table and sighed. I have really encountered a group of pig teammates. This pesticide is giving me a stomachache. Forget it. Let's get to work. Gan Hong, from now on, you will be in charge of this operation. As for me, I will be watching your team from start to finish. My evaluation will be the final result of your team's assessment. Remember, only the winner can stay. Gan Hong nodded heavily. I understand, military advisor. The cows are ready to move out of the ranch. Then, Song Howard put on his earphones and said indifferently, Prepare to slaughter. Gan Hong instantly got up and left. Most of the time, Luacio would act on a whim. Perhaps it was due to the influence of the club's owner's career that he had gradually deviated from his original hobby. Luvia did not notice that the person she had been observing through the rearview mirror was no longer in the car. Boss Luo had already left the car when Oni saw the crazy woman on the street. Now, he had reduced his presence to the minimum and was observing the woman who had lost control due to taking drugs. Someone quickly called the police, and the police quickly rushed to the scene. It should be the police cars patrolling nearby. After receiving the command from the control center, they immediately rushed over. The two police officers used a lot of strength to control the crazy woman and began to disperse the surrounding crowd. They did not leave immediately, but waited for the ambulance to arrive. Because not long after the woman was stopped, she began to foam at the mouth and fainted. Luaccio walked to the front of the woman and looked at her arm. There were numerous tiny wounds, which should be caused by long-term use of syringes. Her skin was dull, and her facial features were sunken. Even if she was not in a violent state, she looked bony, like a fresh corpse that had just crawled out of the grave. The two police officers were chatting. "What happened? We have been catching these crazy guys for the past few days. I heard that this thing has just been put on sale recently. LK Brotherhood is selling it." LK Brotherhood? Don't they never touch poisonous things? It used to be, but it's hard to say now. I heard that there's been a power shuffle in LK Brotherhood. Especially in the past few days, the new boss overthrew the rules set by the previous boss and has been very active these days. This group of villains. I thought that after the previous boss, Buggy, was arrested, this group of people will be quiet. They will only get worse. Didn't they come up with this zombie bath salts? Well, the ambulance is here. Move her up. Where are we going to eat later? The two hurriedly cooperated with the medical staff, who came down from the ambulance and carried the unconscious woman up. Soon after, they drove away in the police car. Boss Luo was still in the same place, but his eyes were looking at an alley across the street. A man wearing a black hoodie put on his hat at this time, turned around, and walked into the alley. Well, Luaccio glanced and followed him. He only needed to go back when he met up with Song Hauren at the airport. A few hours could be considered as a free time for him. At any rate, Luvia and Oni were unable to see that the Luaccio in the car was just an illusion. Rio, in a forest area. Lucy, can you hear me, child?" The lumberjack Uncle Alma and Charlty were searching the forest together. The sky was getting darker and the path was getting harder. They were not sure what the child's name was. They only knew that she had said that her name was Lucy. Thus, the two of them could only call her by that name for now. "What should we do? We still can't find her." Charlty appeared very anxious. For a child who got lost in a forest filled with wild beasts at night, it was a very dangerous thing. "We did not hear anything. That is a good thing. Don't worry, we will find her." Uncle Alma pulled out a small knife from his boot and handed it to Charlty. "We will split up and search for her. That will be faster. Take this to defend yourself. If there is any danger, shout for me. I will not go far. That is the only way." Charlty thought to herself. At the same time, she took the small knife from Uncle Alma's hand, and the two of them split up. Hearing Uncle Alma's footsteps moving further and further away, Charlty looked around at the forest that had turned completely dark. A faint trace of unease flashed through her heart. Suddenly, the sound of birds flapping their wings could be heard coming from the forest. It seemed as though the birds were all around her. Charlty's throat rose. She held the flashlight and the small knife tightly and summoned her courage to move forward. On the other hand, Uncle Alma appeared much more relaxed. As a lumberjack who often entered the forest area, he was as familiar with this forest as it was with his own backyard. When they were passing by a rotten tree trunk, Uncle Alma suddenly stopped and shone his flashlight at the ground. He furrowed his brows. There were clearly the footprints of wild beasts on the muddy ground. Those should be the hooves of wild boars. Although wild boars were not as dangerous as poisonous snakes or wild beasts, they were still very dangerous for a child who was not even 10 years old. Strange, there shouldn't be any wild boars around here. Uncle Alma stood up and looked around. In his impression, wild beasts like wild boars should only appear in deeper parts of the forest area. He was shocked by the wooden handle of the axe in his hand. His gaze became sharper. He was a lumberjack and an excellent hunter. When he was young, he had hunted many wild beasts by himself. Rather than letting the wild boar run around in the forest and eventually hurt the child, It would be safer to lure it out and kill it directly. Besides, hunting a wild boar was an unexpected gain. It could be used to supplement his family's income. Uncle Alma quickly gathered materials from ground. First, he took out a piece of meat jerky from his backpack. Then, he used the withered branches, stones, and weeds nearby to make a simple trap. Finally, he hid behind the rotten tree trunk, turned off the flashlight, and carefully lay dormant. A rustling sound came from the forest. Based on his experience, Uncle Alma knew that his prey was about to appear, and judging from the sound, it seemed to be a big one. He tightened his grip on the axe in his hand and focused his eyes. As expected, not long after, a black shadow was rushing towards the trap he had set up at an extremely fast speed. Uncle Alma silently calculated the time. When he heard the sound of the trap being activated, he suddenly jumped out from behind the tree trunk. He raised the axe in his hand and chopped towards the trap with all his might. The sharp axe chopped off all the withered branches that formed the trap in an instant. However, Uncle Alma suddenly shuddered because he didn't feel that his axe had chopped anything alive. At the same time, Uncle Alma suddenly felt his shoulder become heavy, as if something had landed on his shoulder at the same time. He subconsciously turned his head and saw a small thing, black and white fern, also known as two-color monster willow monkey, or two-colored fern, omnivorous and gregarious. At that moment, the black and white fern that landed on Uncle Alma's shoulder opened its mouth and directly bit towards his cheek. The teeth of the black and white fern were long and sharp. It bit through Uncle Alma's cheek, causing blood to splatter everywhere. Uncle Alma was instantly enraged. He extended his hand and directly grabbed the black and white fern's body, pulling it out from his shoulder and forcefully throwing it to the ground. However, sound could be heard coming from all around him. Uncle Alma nervously turned on his flashlight and shone it forward. He was surprised to see that there were over 10 black and white fern standing in front of him. Those fellows bared their fangs and, without saying a word, pounced towards Uncle Alma. Uncle Alma roared furiously and continuously waved the axe in his hand, directly clashing with those black and white fern. However, these monkeys that were not particularly ferocious and rarely took the initiative to attack humans seemed to have contracted rabies at this moment. They bit Uncle Alma's body and used their claws to tear apart his skin. One after another, from the initial 10 to the subsequent 40 to 50 black and white fern, they completely drowned Uncle Alma. He began to scream miserably as the flesh on his body was bitten off by those crazy monkeys. In the end, the blood vessels on his neck were bitten open. Uncle Alma painfully clutched his neck. However, he could not stop the blood from flowing out from between his fingers. Uncle Alma did not hold on for long before falling to the ground. At that moment, the black and white fern slowly dispersed. Uncle Alma fell to the ground and gradually felt cold. His eyelids were extremely heavy, and he was on the verge of collapsing. All he could see was a small black figure walking towards him. It seemed to be saying something. I originally thought that it was that little nun. Unexpectedly, it was you. Forget it. Sacrifice your soul to me. Perhaps I can recover some of my strength. Lo, Lucy, it's Lucifer. She walked closer and was finally able to clearly see her appearance. It was the little girl that he had once helped. At that moment, this little girl was looking down at him, who was on the verge of death. Why? Uncle Alma was in disbelief. At the same time, he also felt extremely furious. Have you heard of the story of the farmer and the snake? Lucifer sneered. Of course, I am not that snake. I am also not the farmer. I am the one who watched the farmer and the snake in despair. Uncle Alma's eyes widened. In the end, he did not say another word. After confirming that Uncle Alma was no longer breathing, Lucifer quickly took off his clothes. Then, she bit her finger and used her blood to write something on Uncle Alma's chest. Chapter 8:17. In the beginning, perhaps in ancient times or before ancient times, the first power that Western humans possessed seemed to come from external objects. Fresh blood, objects in nature that were tainted with a special aura, special languages, and so on. They were used as mediums to contact the supernatural powers in nature. Gradually, they were discovered and used. Lucifer bit her finger and used her blood to write an ancient Hebrew language on Uncle Am's body. It was also a mysterious language in the ancient Hebrew language system, but there was no doubt that it was a system outside of her own power. Even a normal person could use it if they had enough mediums and knew how to operate it. Of course, such a simple application of ancient supernatural power would not be effective. But for Lucifer's current state, it was an opportunity for her to not lose completely and not have a chance to turn the tables, although she had never thought of turning the tables. Seems like my blood still contains the power of origin. Lucifer frowned as she watched the blood-red runes on Uncle Alma's body glowing under her manipulation. From this, she could deduce some of the mysteries of her power loss. Perhaps she had just cut off the connection with her own power of origin. It was like a blocked road. Of course, she did not think that it would be easy to clear the blocked road. If the power in her blood was still there, then she could do more things. Lucifer pondered for a moment and came up with a new idea. SUDUOTA. A war. GAQI11. KUO. WENG. Her lips moved and strange syllables came out one after another. This was an ancient summoning magic that used her blood as a medium. It could be summoned from hell to serve as a tamed demon. Lucifer did not dare to summon a tamed demon that was too powerful. Otherwise, with her current state, she would be defeated at any time. The blood-red runes on Uncle Am's chest started to come alive. The strange runes started to distort and then drilled into Uncle Am's body. His entire body started to dry up rapidly. All organic matter started to transform into the source of power for this magic. When his entire body melted away, only a red substance was left on the ground. They gathered together and finally transformed into a red ball of light, like a red egg of light. Crack! Suddenly, the eggshell grew tired. A tiny thing emerged from the egg and stopped on Lucifer's shoulder. They were blood-red in color, and their bodies were like flames. They didn't have a fixed form and had no limbs. However, they were a type of familiar that could continuously grow by sucking blood. They were called blood elves. For Lucifer, the blood elf was probably the most suitable tamed demon. She could feed the blood elf with her own blood and cultivate it to an extremely high level. She could then create a blood elf clone that belonged to her. Of course, this would probably take a very long time. This blood elf probably couldn't even absorb a milligram of her blood. After the blood elf was summoned, the surrounding black and white locusts in a berserk state instinctively sensed danger and bared their teeth at Lucifer. Lucifer snorted coldly and glanced at the black and white locusts. The blood elf on her shoulder felt its master's will and immediately flew out to suck the black and white locust blood. In just a moment, the blood of dozens of black and white locusts was completely devoured. When the blood elf returned to Lucifer's side, its body had grown a little. A newborn blood elf's growth speed was quite good. At this time, Uncle A.M., are you there? Uncle A.M., Lucy, Uncle A.M. It was Shalti's voice. She might have heard something and came here to search. Lucifer patted the blood elf beside her and suddenly had a new idea. To cultivate a blood elf, it was best to feed it high-quality blood from the beginning. For example, the blood of a virgin. Without a doubt, Shalti was a very ideal blood sacrifice. As for the old nun in the monastery, she seemed to be of good quality. Although she was old, she had always maintained her purity. More importantly, Mother Delon still had the seed of holy power. After carefully considering it for a while, a strange smile appeared on Lucifer's face. She had lost her power and was imprisoned into a child's body, but she was still the prideful master, the queen of hell. She had no intention of resigning herself to fate. Stop shouting. I'm here. Come over. Lucifer suddenly shouted in Shalti's direction. Not long after, Shalti jogged over. Seeing Lucifer unscathed, Shalti was very happy. She carefully observed Lucifer's body, as if she was afraid that she was injured. I'm fine, and I'm doing quite well for now. Lucifer slapped Shalti's hand away. The blood elf attached itself to her body and turned into a blood-red flame mark on the skin on her back. Right, did you see Uncle A.M.? Lucy? Shalthi asked. No. Lucifer subconsciously wanted to say no, but just as she spat out a word, she began to have a splitting headache and cold sweat broke out. I saw him. Lucifer looked at Shalthi and said sincerely, I killed him. I used his soul and body as materials to make a familiar. Oh, Shalthi nodded and took Lucifer's hand. Uncle AM should be fine. Maybe we should go back to the camp first. If we go any further, I'm afraid I'll get lost. I said I killed him. Oh, Shalthi nodded. Are you hungry? Let's go back to the camp. Right, Lucy. My name is Lucifer. Right, Lucifer. Where do you live? Hell. What a poor child. To be treated like this, it is indeed like hell. Shalthi looked at the collar and chains on Lucifer's body and her weak appearance when she appeared. After the people outside clear the road, I will immediately take you to the police station. They can help you. Child abuse is a very serious crime. Shalthi said indignantly. Lucifer looked at the stars and said, The police can't help me. Could it be that the one who tortured you has a big background? Shalthi frowned. Heaven and earth, plus the God you believe in, if possible, they would not choose to go against him. Shalthi nodded. I think I can begin to understand what you mean. Although the description is somewhat strange, this person should have a big background. She recalled the time when she picked up Lucifer. Back then, she was wearing a red dress with an inappropriate size. Although she did not know why she had to wear it like that. Judging by the dress, she could tell that it was a very high-grade item. In Uncle Alma's words, this was a child with a rich imagination. Perhaps, after being treated cruelly in daily life, hiding in a fantasy world was the only safe haven for her soul. After thinking about that, Shalti's pity for Lucifer increased by several notches. A vague idea formed within her mind. Lucifer, do you have any relatives who can help you? Lucifer looked up at the sky and sneered. Relatives? They probably want me to die. She stood there quietly, looking at the stars with a complicated expression. Suddenly, Shalti hugged her from behind and whispered, Don't be afraid. You will have a place to go. Mother Delon and I will take care of you. Why don't you stay in a monastery for the time being? All right. Lucifer nodded. I don't want to stay here. Can you take me back to the monastery now? Let's wait for Uncle AM to come back from the camp before telling him about it. Shalti said hesitantly. Lucifer said, Can't you just leave him a note? At any rate, don't you think he will be fine? But okay. Shalti nodded. Then let's go back to the monastery first. She felt that it was easy to be led by the nose by this little guy. The man in a black hoodie soon arrived at an alley full of graffiti after passing through a few or complicated alleys. Batman Alley was a very famous tourist attraction in the area. Of course, this mysterious man didn't come here to visit as a tourist. After several turns, he soon arrived at the back of a tavern. The man quickly knocked on the back door with a certain rhythm before someone opened the door to receive him. After entering the door, the man took off his hoodie and looked inside the room. There were many people here. They were all members of the LK Brotherhood. Where's the boss? He asked. The boss is talking to someone upstairs. Ooh. His companion shook his head. I don't know. It's a woman with a hot body. She looks like a white-collar worker. I really want to fuck her. The man nodded and said indifferently. Then I'll go up later. Today's goods have been sold out. I'll go take a rest first. His companion made an okay gesture, then turned on the stereo in the room. A burst of music rang out, and many people in the room began to scoop up some white powder with a spoon, then heated it up with a lighter and started to smoke it. In just a few minutes, this place was like a demon's field, confusing and exciting. At the same time, the upstairs was much quieter, but also much more dangerous. For two men who were tied up with plastic belts, what awaited them might be death. In fact, before they were tied to the ground, they had been beaten to the point that they couldn't recognize their original appearance. Now that they were lying on the ground, their internal organs were probably already broken and their consciousness was very muddled. This was an office-type place. A man in his 30s sat on a large office chair, playing with the tip of a small knife in his hand. This man was the new boss of the LK Brotherhood, named Vita. Opposite him sat a blonde woman in a black dress. Vita nailed the knife in his hand directly on the table and then stared at the blonde woman. "Miss Cassini, it seems that we can't get anything out of them. It's pointless to waste time. Let's talk about something else." The blonde woman called Cassini nodded. Vita waved his hand happily, and the men in the room quickly took the two seriously beaten men out. When only Vita and Cassini were left in the room, Vita got up and took 2 glasses and a bottle of sugarcane wine from the wine cabinet next to him. These 2 men were Buggy's confidants when he was still in power. They are still very loyal to him. Ignoring Vita's action, Cassini continued. "Once Buggy comes back and wants to regain power, he will definitely find them. You better keep a close eye on them. Mr. St. Fran doesn't want his plan to be affected." "Mr. St. Fran?" Vita drank the wine. "Mr. St. Fran? In fact, I don't understand why Doflamingo had to change his name. It's none of your business. You just need to do what Mr. St. Fran asked you to do," Cassini said indifferently. Vita sat directly on the table at this time, looking like a ruffian. He lifted Cassini's chin and smiled. "Asked me to do what? Did you use the wrong word? Doflamingo and I are at most partners. He's not my old friend. Now, I'm a boss of LK. Cassini sneered disdainfully. "Really? If Buggy's death is not confirmed, can your position as the boss be firm? At most, you can only influence the younger members of the LK society. Those old people won't listen to you easily. If you don't have Mr. St. Fran's support." Vita shrugged, as if he didn't care, and said casually, "Buggy is just a has-been boss. He has been eating, drinking, and playing all these years in prison. He has long lost his ambition. Even without Doflamingo, the Brotherhood will belong to me sooner or later." Cassini didn't want to continue the conversation with Vita, but stood up directly. She took out a box from her bag. "There are 3 kilograms here. You should distribute them as soon as possible." Cassini picked up the handbag and was about to turn around and leave. "Wait!" Vita grabbed Cassini's arm and stopped her, saying coldly, "At first, Doflamingo asked me to distribute them to him as a condition for helping me. It's not a big deal. It's just a mutual benefit. But isn't the medicine a bit too strong? And he doesn't want any money from selling the ears. What does that mean? Nothing. Mr. St. Fran just wants to make money for you. Aren't you happy?" Cassini frowned. "And please let go of your hand. Why are you leaving so soon?" Vita suddenly pulled her hard and then pressed Cassini on the table, saying with a weird smile, "Since I'm earning money, I might as well give you to me. I promise I'll help him distribute them soon." Vita stretched out his finger, stroking Cassini's cheek, and said, "It's really a waste that Doflamingo has a woman like you around him." His finger slid down along Cassini's cheek, touched her neck, and then quickly touched her collarbone. Cassini was expressionless, and even made a gesture of sighing, as if she was bored. At the same time, she bent her knee and mercilessly hit Vita's lower abdomen. This sudden movement made Vita cry out in pain. Cassini showed a strength that had nothing to do with a weak woman and pressed Vita on the table instead. She directly pulled out the knife that Vita nailed on the table and then nailed it down along his neck. All this happened in a split second, but the blade had already cut his skin. Vita couldn't help sweating. He struggled for a few times, but found that this woman was much stronger than ordinary men. He couldn't get rid of her. "It's Mr. St. Fran. I don't want you to call me by the wrong name next time. Understand?" Vita looked at the hot woman's eyes and suddenly shuddered. This woman's indifference made him feel like he was looking at ice. "Okay." Then Cassini pulled out the knife and threw it at the wall beside her. Vita subconsciously looked over and saw that the knife had hit the bullseye of the target hanging on the wall. He spat on the ground. Cassini tidied up her collar. "Remember to distribute the goods." After Cassini walked out of the office, Vita touched his neck with trembling hands and then quickly drank up the wine in the glass. Only then did he regain some color. After leaving the tavern, Cassini walked alone in the alley full of graffiti. She looked around and then took out the phone to make a call. The second batch of goods has been delivered to Vita. A strange laughter came from the phone, and then St. Fran's voice came, "I know you can do it well. After that, we'll ask some small gangs in Rio to help us distribute the goods. Well, come back to me quickly. I'll go to the city hall tonight and talk to them about sponsoring them to renovate the municipal theater. You're my secretary, so you have to be there, beautiful Miss Cusini. Got it. Cusini nodded, but she was puzzled. In fact, I don't understand. If you want to support public undertakings, there should be many better options. Why do you choose to renovate the theater? Another strange laughter came, and St. Franz suddenly said, if I say that there may be a nuclear bomb hidden in the theater, would you believe it? Of course not. Cusini quickly disappeared in the alley. After she walked out, Boss Luo slowly walked out of the alley next to it and then walked towards Vita's tavern. He walked in. The surging sound continued, and no one noticed that an uninvited guest had come. Boss Luo walked up the stairs with his hands behind his back and finally came to the door of Vita's office. The door opened and closed. Vita, who was drinking alone, looked at the door in confusion and frowned. Because he noticed the door opening and closing and felt that something was wrong and unreasonable, a blurry figure suddenly appeared in Vita's sight and gradually became clear. Vita rubbed his eyes subconsciously. It was as if someone had suddenly appeared in front of him without him noticing, but he did not know how this guy got close. Who are you? Vita suddenly became vigilant. Luocchio snapped his fingers, and Vita fell asleep on the table. The box left by Cassini was still on the table. Luocchio picked up the box, opened it, and looked at the thing inside. It was a small white crystal, which looked like coarse salt. Luocchio hooked some with his finger, and after thinking for a moment, he suddenly put these small white crystals into his mouth. He then closed his eyes. His brain seemed to be stimulated by something, and many thoughts came out of his consciousness in an instant. But in just a moment, many fantasies and impulses disappeared without a trace. Luocchio opened his eyes, and the world was still silent, like a black and white silent movie, but a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. Chapter 8:18. The coffee shop where Caroline and Lawyer Carlo met was still the same one where they met last time. Caroline found that Lawyer Carlo was dressed exactly the same as last time, including his wrinkled and old suit, and even the shirt inside. Lawyer Carlo had a sincere smile, and his attitude was much more enthusiastic than last time. At this time, he was looking at the two men beside Caroline. I wonder who these two gentlemen are? Lawyer Carlo asked in confusion. Caroline glanced around and was about to introduce the two men when one of the men indifferently said, We're her cousins. I'm her eldest cousin, and he's her second cousin. This time, we're accompanying her to discuss some matters with you. Oh, hello, cousin. Lawyer Carlo nodded and looked at Caroline with a smile. Miss Caroline, you are really careful. Caroline nodded awkwardly and echoed, It's good to be careful. She knew that Lawyer Carlo seemed to have misunderstood something. He probably felt that she called two people over to guard against him cheating on the transaction of Dania's real estate. Lawyer Carlo, since we have already been introduced, let's get down to business. The other man, the second cousin, said coldly at this time. No problem. Mr. Carlo lit a cigarette. I've already prepared the relevant procedures and documents. Naya has also signed the entrustment document. All that's left is for Miss Caroline to personally sign the entrustment document in front of Naya. Carlo took out the documents he had prepared. It was a thick stack of documents. The eldest cousin and second cousin frowned. They had a headache reading these documents that were longer than chicken intestines, so they simply stopped reading. However, they had their own way of doing things after all. The eldest cousin suddenly shouted at this time, Lawyer Carlo, right? Yes. Is there a problem? Lawyer Carlo asked curiously. The eldest cousin took Lawyer Carlo's cigarette box directly at this time. The document signature and so on, just do it here. We just care about whether our cousin can get the money in the end. You know, we don't play legal word games, but we can play other games, very exciting games. After saying that, the big cousin directly crushed the cigarette box, and the muscles on his arms even bulged up high. Second cousin took the initiative. This place is not big, but it's not small either. If I want to find someone to play games with us, it's very easy. Carlo smiled calmly, but when he saw his second cousin suddenly lift up a corner of his shirt and see a black pistol in his belt, his expression changed slightly. Carlo hurriedly said, No problem. I guarantee that there will be no problem. As for the buyer, I already have some ideas. He's a councilman who recently found a girlfriend and plans to buy a house for his girlfriend to live in. Second cousin pretended not to hear it and looked out the window indifferently. A fugitive. Naturally, he was not afraid of anyone. They had seen too many people like Mr. Carlo, who would lie about who he knew for no reason. Most of these people just wanted to take advantage of others. But in reality, they were just weaklings who had no ability at all. How much is a councilman's salary? Big cousin sneered disdainfully. Paying such a high price to buy a house? I'm afraid it's money of unknown origin. Carlo smiled embarrassedly. Since everyone has reached a consensus, why don't we go to the hospital and let Miss Caroline sign this power of attorney? Big cousin looked at the time and nodded. Hurry up. Quick, quick. Wearing an emerald green olive crown on his head, Bucky looked solemn. He closed his eyes and calmly raised his hands. Bucky, who had been hiding to practice for the past 2 days, unexpectedly made rapid progress. This was probably because he had signed a contract with Lucifer, so his spirit power was stronger than the average person, but he had never developed it. Therefore, he practiced the meditation technique he got from Miss Maid and cultivated a little bit of spiritual power in 2 days. And this little bit of spiritual power was enough for him to activate the inherent magic in the Ring of Blessings, or it could become a divine spell. The power of blessing. The emerald green crown could achieve the effect of amplification at the same time. So Bucky was full of confidence at this time. In the first 30 or 40 years of his life, he had lived a bloody life, but he didn't expect to be able to come into contact with transcendence when he was middle-aged. And he was even releasing transcendence power. Quick, 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 quick. Although the target of the spell was only a stray dog, a limping stray dog that was about to starve to death. At this time, Bucky's palm emitted a faint white light. He took a deep breath and put his palm on the stray dog's forehead. The faint light began to spread from his palm to the stray dog's whole body. Soon after, the dying stray dog suddenly stood up as if it had been injected with chicken blood. Its body was still shriveled, but it looked full of energy. The stray dog seemed to be rejuvenated and bit Bucky's palm at once. Bucky was so angry that he raised his leg and kicked it. After the stray dog was kicked away, it was shocked and ran out in a panic. Bucky didn't chase after it. He just stared at his palm blankly, and his eyes flashed with ecstasy. He said excitedly, "Oh, God, Miss Yi, did you see that? My power. It's amazing. I actually made it come back to life. This is just squeezing out the only potential in its body. It won't last long before it dies." The maid's words were like a basin of cold water, sending Bucky's enthusiasm to the Siberian plateau and letting the cold wind tear him apart. The legendary bad guy looked sadly at the maid who was sitting quietly on the stool and flipping through the cookbook. This was already the 7th cookbook that the maid had flipped through in his memory. How many was she going to flip through? If that's the case, this thing can't be considered a divine spell, right? In fact, it's the same as injecting hormones. Bucky squatted down a little discouraged. The maid said indifferently, "The stray dog's life is almost at its end. If you stimulate its remaining vitality, it will naturally die later. But humans are different. If it's just a minor illness or pain, it won't have much impact, even if it intensifies the vitality. Especially the rich, they can get enough life nutrients by eating high-grade ingredients. This consumption can be quickly replenished." Bucky suddenly pricked up his ears and listened. Lucifer and the demons in the blazing hot lips bar had never taught him this knowledge so selflessly. Besides, the maid turned to another page without looking up. If it's a critically ill person or someone who has been diagnosed and can't be saved, you can stimulate their last potential and let them live a little longer. Then, won't they be grateful and even rely on you? When your mental power is strong enough, you can even consume your own ability to maintain the vitality of these people. They will become more dependent on you and even treat you as a god. After a long time, they will become pious, and piety is the foundation of faith. When your mental power is enough, the crown on your head can evolve into an Elysium. The maid suddenly frowned and raised her head. She found that Bucky could doze off while squatting. She was afraid that he didn't hear much of what she said before. She knew that this guy had successfully used the blessing spell for the first time, and it probably consumed a lot of his mental power, so he was sleepy. But the maid flicked her fingers directly, and a bunch of black sparks fell directly on Bucky. But in an instant, Bucky woke up with a wail and then rolled on the ground, frantically trying to extinguish the flames on his body. Pain, pain, pain. It hurts so much. Help! But the black fire came and went quickly. Bucky stood up awkwardly and heard the maid say indifferently, "The next time I talk, don't let me find you dozing off." Yes. Bucky stood up straight. He promised that this was the first time he had ever stood up straight. The maid suddenly closed the recipe book in her hand and stood up. Bucky quickly said, "Miss Yi, is it time for lunch?" The maid just glanced at him indifferently. "Dress up. I'll take you to a place tonight." "Where are we going?" Bucky asked subconsciously. Yi didn't answer, but glanced at Bucky with kind eyes. Bucky quickly shut his mouth and watched the maid leave. But after the maid left, Bucky thought of something and asked the air loudly, "What should I dress up as? Is it trendier or more formal?" Mr. Orphe's sleep was far longer than he expected. When he woke up, it was obviously past lunchtime. He rubbed his forehead with some annoyance and quickly got up to dress. After going downstairs, the maid Barbara was looking at the hygiene in the room. "Mr. Orphe, you're awake. I didn't dare to disturb you, but lunch is ready. Shall I heat it up for you right away?" "No, I'm in a hurry." Mr. Orphe shook his head and walked straight to the door. Before going out, he seemed to think of something and immediately turned back to ask, "Did you bring Louis back yesterday?" Barbara had to say, "Sir, there was a power outage yesterday, and the school was on holiday." "I already told you. Have you forgotten?" "Oh, yes, you did." Mr. Orphe nodded. "I'll go see Louis before going out." "Is he in his room?" Barbara said, "Dr. Frankie took Louis out this morning and said that he would accompany him well today and let you work in peace." Mr. Orphe was stunned. After a moment of silence, he nodded. "Did he say where he was going?" Barbara said, "I heard that the doctor was going to take him to the Science Museum." Louis was very excited. "I think there should be no problem. I'm going out." Mr. Orphe pushed the door open and walked out without looking back. Mr. Orphe quickly walked to the garage and drove away from his house. He immediately called his secretary, and before the other party could say anything, he said, "Sorry, I overslept today. I'll be right back. Is there anything urgent you need to deal with?" "Today is Friday. According to the schedule, sir, you have a meeting with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at 3 p.m. this afternoon, which you have to attend. In addition, a new batch of monitoring equipment samples will be delivered at 4:30 p.m. It's the batch that you requested last time. The manufacturer hopes that you can be present when they do the testing. In addition, at 7 p.m., Lieutenant General Germon hopes that you can attend his birthday party. Cancel the birthday party for me. Make the other arrangements as usual." Mr. Orphe quickly made a decision. "Understood. In addition, we found new clues about the theater hostage case. Send me the information. I'll read in the car. Tell me." Mr. Orphe turned off the car's navigation and received the information sent by his secretary. Soon after, a man's photo appeared on the screen. The man was wearing a white waiter's uniform and looked very handsome. The secretary's voice sounded, "Sir, this person's name is Oni, a professional gunman. We found a record of this person's appearance from the theater's surveillance video. Tell me about this gunman." Mr. Orphe frowned. "According to the information in our inventory, Oni was born in a small village in southern Peru. He started to make a living before he finished high school. When he was young, he did a lot of jobs, including security, parking, mechanic, waiter in a shooting club, and even a cowherd for a year. Later, Oni disappeared for 2 years. After 2 years, he debuted as a gunman and was active in various countries in South America. There are 29 recorded successful crimes." Mr. Orphe frowned deeper. One of the top 5 gunmen in the Latin American underground world. The shooting of the Senate. In addition, according to reliable sources, Oni currently belongs to a force called Iris Flower, the secretary said. The car that was driving suddenly braked, scaring the cars behind it and forcing them to stop as well. If he didn't see the government license plate of the car that suddenly stopped, the owner would have gotten out of the car and scolded them. Mr. Orphe had to drive the car to the side, His frowning eyebrows were almost twisted together. He seemed to be talking to himself. It's actually iris flower. What do they want to do? Is this a provocation to our country? No, sir. Iris flower is a mercenary group. They do things according to the money. Orphe seemed to smell something. They won't assassinate a big shot in a country's government for no reason. In the end, the hand behind this, where did it come from? Suddenly, Orphe felt as if he had fallen into an unfathomable vortex, and this vortex would probably cause turmoil in the entire country. Sir, do you need us to issue an arrest warrant? This matter, besides you, who else knows? Orphe quickly asked. There's also the investigation team. Other than that, no one. Orphe solemnly said, this matter, keep it a secret first. I don't want to hear any rumors about this matter from the outside. Okay, the secretary quickly answered, and then said, by the way, sir, there's one more thing, which is also the follow-up of the hostage case. Some people who were present at that time died, and some guests spontaneously organized a mourning event tonight. But they have reported to the police, and they should make arrangements and dispatch people to maintain order. Got it. You can deal with the small matter. Orphe nodded. I'm a little late, so I won't go back to the headquarters. I'll go directly to the news conference of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Wait for me there. Chapter 819. This was a beige Puma GTB. The style of the previous world and the outstanding power made it able to attract a lot of attention on the street. It was only an old car, but it was the star of the old car world. For nostalgic car enthusiasts, they probably couldn't wait to play with such a well-maintained car. Of course, there was also an old grandfather and a child in the old car. Dr. French and his grandson, Louis. The school teacher said that you can't drive after drinking. Louis was about to graduate from elementary school, but he seemed to have inherited his mother's genes, so he looked a little cute and short. Louis, who was playing a game of birds on his phone, looked at Dr. French beside him. I didn't drink, the doctor insisted. Louis said, but you smell of alcohol. Dr. French still insisted, believe me, it's just a drink an adults drink. When you grow up, you'll think so too. Louis shrugged and suddenly asked, Grandpa, do you not know how to get to the Science Museum? Dr. French said, oh, my dear Louis, why do you think I don't know the way to the Science Museum? Louis rolled his eyes and said, but Grandpa, you've been looking at the map since just now. Dr. French threw the map in his hand on the back seat and said seriously, believe me, child, I'm just looking to see if there's a shorter way. Isn't the Science Museum in front? Louis pointed to the front of the road. Is there a shorter way other than a straight line? Louis looked at the Science Museum in front of him and continued to roll his eyes. Oh, that's true. Dr. French adjusted his reading glasses and then stepped hard on the accelerator. The car suddenly sped up. Slow down. Louis was taken aback. He finally managed to relax and asked, Grandpa, will they let us in? My desk mate, Adolphe, said that the Science Museum is under renovation recently and temporarily not for tours. Dr. French chuckled. Don't worry, the curator is my old friend. He'll take good care of you. But after you're done, I need you to give me a review. My dear Louis, I don't think it will trouble you, will it? Louis immediately shrugged his shoulders. Dr. Frankie seemed to be in a better mood, so the beige Puma Jeep B slowly drove into the parking lot of the Science Museum. Just like what Dr. Frankie said, the curator was an old friend of his. Therefore, as soon as they got out of the car, the two of them were received by the staff in the museum. Doctor, the curator is waiting for you in the office. Oh, okay. Sorry to trouble you. Dr. Frankie nodded at the young employee, then said, this is my grandson, Louis. May I ask you to show him around? I'll come find you later. Of course. The employee nodded politely. Dr. Frankie, who was very familiar with this science and technology museum, soon arrived at the curator's office alone. The curator was slightly younger than Dr. Frankie. He was a thin old man in his 50s named Matthews. He and Dr. Frankie were students at the same university. Many years ago, the two met at an alumni meeting. They hit it off at first sight and became good friends for many years. How have you been, old friend? Matthews was very happy to see Dr. Frankie. Because they were old friends, Dr. Frankie obviously didn't intend to hide anything. Instead, He smiled bitterly, sat down, and said directly, "It can't get any worse. I've heard some things about the theater." Matthews nodded, "But I'm not very clear about the specific situation. How do you want me to help you?" Dr. Frankie said directly, "Matthews, thank you for introducing me to Mr. Billy. We were about to negotiate a cooperation, but some problems happened in the middle. Now, Mr. Billy seems to want to terminate the cooperation with me." Matthews frowned and didn't say anything. Dr. Frankie had to ask with anticipation, "Now, Mr. Billy has been using healing as an excuse to refuse to meet. Old friend, can you let Mr. Billy see me again? I'm just a not-so-close uncle of his." Matthews suddenly sighed. "Old friend, listen to me. Let's put an end to this matter. Billy's unwillingness to meet you has already made some things clear." "Why? Didn't we have a good discussion before?" Dr. Frankie was a little agitated. "Believe me, after so many years, I've corrected all the wrong data. As long as we get the technical support from Leighton Group, we'll definitely be able to successfully launch a satellite of our own. In fact, I'm looking forward to seeing that day come." Matthews leaned back in his chair and shook his head, "But I also know that this is probably just an unrealistic idea at the moment." "You don't know yet, do you? The people from Leighton Group have raised the asking price for technical support. This price has far exceeded Billy's expectations. In addition to the original remuneration, they also want the development rights of 3 mines for 50 years. Old friend, 3 rich mines. This is something our entire family can't afford. Are they taking advantage of the situation?" Dr. Frankie said angrily. "Old friend, look at the truth. There's no such thing as help for no reason in this world. Remember, the other party is a capitalist." Dr. Frankie was about to argue when Matthews said, "The head of parliament is dead. Now, many people are scheming for this position. I'm not afraid to tell you the truth. Billy is also very interested in this position. In addition, a new round of elections will be prepared soon. He wants to invest money in this war." Dr. Frankie sneered. "Elections? Political power? Every time, they had to spend an endless amount of wealth to compete for these things. After all these years, which one of them had actually chosen the same words as him? Matthews, do you also think that investing resources in the game of power is more important than using them to develop technology?" "Frankie, calm down," Matthews said kindly. "Billy wants to change this country from the inside. How can a country that is rotten to the bones provide a really good environment for scientific research? Wait a little longer. After the election is over and Billy wins, I'll do my best to help you. Old friend, this country still needs you, so please calm down for the time being and polish yourself better." "I can't wait that long." Dr. Frankie shook his head. "Oh, old friend, you're only 65 years old this year. I believe that you'll still be in high spirits in a few years. Because no one knows better than me how much you love your career. You never know fatigue." Matthews said slowly, "After next year's election, believe me, everything will be better. I'll think of a way myself." Dr. Frankie suddenly stood up and walked directly to the office door. However, he still had a scholar's side after all. Before going out, he took a deep breath and turned to look at his old friend. "Thank you for your hospitality today. I think Lewis will be very happy." "Frankie." Matthew looked at Dr. Frankie quietly. Suddenly, he sighed and said, "Old friend, tell me, in fact, in your heart, is this persistence still the same as before?" "I don't understand what you're talking about." Dr. Frankie frowned. "You should be clear." Matthews shook his head. "Is it for your own liberation, or is it for this country to have its own satellite like back then?" "Of course it's—" Dr. Frankie blurted out, but then he suddenly stopped and said, "For our own satellite. Is that really the case?" Matthews stared at Dr. Frankie for a long time. "Okay, old friend, I'll try one last time and see if I can convince Billy." "Thank you." The young librarian accompanied Lewis in the Science and Technology Museum, introducing the origins of the various exhibits and the stories behind them. The child was very excited about the various exhibits that were full of science and technology. If it weren't for the fact that touching was prohibited, he probably wouldn't have been able to resist touching them. "What's this?" Lewis pointed to a big guy in the corner of the second museum and asked. When the young librarian was about to answer, Dr. Frankie's voice came from afar. This is the M901 satellite model, which was developed by our country. From the assembly to the components, everything was done here. Grandpa. Lewis looked at Dr. Frankie walking over. The doctor stood in front of the M901 satellite and looked at it silently. No one knew what he was thinking. The young librarian was familiar with the history of the exhibits in the museum. He looked at Lewis and said, "Lewis, this satellite was completed under the command of Dr. Frankie. Did you know?" Wow. Lewis's eyes widened, and he looked at his grandfather with eyes full of disbelief and surprise. "Grandpa, you're amazing." Dr. Frankie just shook his head and whispered, "No matter how amazing something is, what's the use of it if it can't go where it's supposed to be?" Lewis didn't hear that. He just moved closer to the satellite exhibit, wanting to see all of it. He looked at the information written on the sign and was surprised to find something. It's true. Grandpa's name is written here. Creator, Frankie Bursman. And Margie. Margie? Grandpa. This seems to be Mom's name. Lewis, it's getting late. Let's go back. Dr. Frankie suddenly pulled Lewis's arm. "You promised me that if I brought you to the Science Museum, you'd have to study hard from the afternoon to the evening. It's time now." "Oh, okay." Lewis reluctantly agreed. Soon, the young librarian sent Dr. Frankie and Lewis to the parking lot, and then returned to his post. After getting in the car, Dr. Frankie suddenly said, "Lewis, can you ask that librarian for 2 bottles of water? I'm a bit thirsty." "No problem." Lewis nodded. After Lewis left, Dr. Frankie took out a small black notebook from his pocket and started to read it. He suddenly frowned because he found that there was an extra black card in the notebook. Dr. Frankie picked up the black card and stared at it for a long time. A trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. He really couldn't remember how this thing came to him. He looked at it silently, as if he had lost his mind. It wasn't until he felt his body being shaken that he suddenly woke up. He didn't know when Lewis had come back, but he still had 2 bottles of mineral water in his hand and kept calling his name. "Grandpa, what's wrong with you?" "Nothing. I was thinking about something and got distracted." Dr. Frankie shook his head and put the black card in the small black notebook. After putting it away, he touched Lewis's head. "Okay, where are we going now? Didn't you just say you wanted to go home?" "Oh, yes, let's go home." Dr. Frankie calmed himself down before he started the Pumajit B. In the evening, Bucky waited anxiously, because the servant girl had left at lunchtime and hadn't come back yet. This was different from yesterday. Yesterday, after lunchtime ended, she immediately came over and urged him to practice his meditation technique. Just as Bucky was considering whether he should go outside to try his luck, footsteps suddenly came from behind. Bucky knew it was a servant girl, so he immediately turned around. At this time, the servant girl didn't wear her black and white maid uniform. Instead, she wore a very casual dress and a light coat. If he hadn't seen this woman's true face, Bucky would have been deceived by the pure side of this woman at this time. Maybe he would have asked how much a night would cost. "Didn't I ask you to dress up?" You looked at Bucky. Her voice was still indifferent. Bucky was stunned for a moment. He then looked at himself and sniffed his collar. "I've already dressed up properly. This is the best I could find. You know, I don't have a penny on me now. This set of clothes is the best I found in a nearby house. I even took a shower. You see, this is a branded product. Zegna, although the size is a little different, I'll make do with it. This is a knockoff." Yi shook her head. "Your style was designed by me 5 years ago. I can distinguish the real from the fake." "You designed it?" Bucky opened his mouth. Yi said indifferently, "It's nothing. It's just a little interest in the past. I have a position as a designer in that company, but I haven't sent any drawings over for several years." F***CK. Aren't you a bloody female corpse? "Forget it. As you said, I'll make do with it." Yi shook her head. "Anyway, I have never expected your taste. Speaking of which, I seem to be your customer?" Bucky suddenly said, "This is your after-sales service?" Miss Maid said blankly, "I'm now just a guide who assists you in collecting faith. I'm not greeting you. If you don't meet my expectations and my master is disappointed because he can't see the results when he comes back, I'll break you down into particles finer than atoms and let you, Bucky, become a real legend." Where are we going now?" The theater. With that, Miss Maid threw a bottle to Bucky, which contained a light green liquid. The bottle was very small, like a perfume bottle. What is this? It's used to restore your mental power. You said indifferently, don't use too much. At your current level, sniffing is enough to restore once. If you use too much, your consciousness will explode and your brain will die. Bucky put it into his pocket without saying anything and nodded cautiously. Miss Maid said suddenly, but your goal tonight is to use it all up. Chapter 820. At 7:30 tonight, a memorial service will be held at the Municipal Theater. Some sounds came from the taxi's radio, but the people in the car didn't seem to pay much attention. Big Cousin and Second Cousin sandwiched Caroline in the middle, while Lawyer Carlo sat in the passenger seat. Originally, Lawyer Carlo's plan was to take the bus. However, Big Cousin said that if it was a taxi, they would pay for it. Thus, Lawyer Carlo readily agreed. Caroline, you and your second cousin have a good relationship. There was some silence in the car. Lawyer Carlo tried to find some topics to talk about. He saw that Caroline and second cousin had been holding hands, although it was a little strange that they were covered with clothes. But who didn't have a strange hobby? Second cousin just glanced at Lawyer Carlo coldly, which made Lawyer Carlo shrug. He was so bored that he simply put on his headphones and played with his phone. Seeing this, Caroline lowered her head and whispered in her second cousin's ear, "Can you untie my handcuffs? It's easy for people to break them in the hospital and cause trouble." The second cousin only gave Caroline a family-like smile before looking out of the window. He had no plans to do anything. Caroline leaned against the chair in frustration, feeling more and more uneasy. In fact, after coming out of the Simple factory in Boston, she had been trying to find a way to escape, including when she said that she would spend money to buy her life in the factory. Everything was just a stall for time and find a chance to escape. However, she didn't expect that Big Cousin and Second Cousin would watch her so closely. They didn't even let her touch anything. She was just at the bottom of society, not a special elite. She had almost thought of all the ways she could think of, and now it seemed that she could only resign herself to fate. Right? Second Cousin still has a gun on him. Oh, we've arrived at the hospital. Lawyer Carlo suddenly turned around and smiled happily, revealing a look that said, "There's a good show going on." To Caroline's surprise, when she was about to get out of the car, she suddenly realized that her handcuffs were gone. Second Cousin pretended not to know anything, but he put his hand on her shoulder and pushed her all the way. Big Cousin followed closely behind, not giving Caroline any chance at all. When Caroline saw Nia again, she seemed to be much weaker, and her complexion was even worse. The ward was bright, but there was a kind of gloominess that could be seen. The entire ward seemed to darken because of Nia's defeated aura. Caroline had mixed feelings. Nia was very tired, which seemed to be due to the side effects of the anti-cancer drug she was taking. Carlo directly held Nia's withered hand and whispered in her ear the purpose of his visit. Perhaps it would be a blessing for Nia to have such a person speaking softly in her ear in the last moments of her life, Caroline thought. Caroline knew that it would be difficult for her to know what happened to Nia, but there was no doubt that after Caroline conspired to cheat Nia of her last fortune to fight the disease, what awaited her would be a night without dawn. "I'm sorry, Nia," with Nia sober and Carlo, who had a legal lawyer's license as witness, Caroline personally signed the power of attorney and several other documents. "Can I have a few words with Caroline?" Nia said slowly with a tired voice. Lawyer Carlo nodded and politely stepped aside. Caroline glanced at Second Cousin subconsciously, and the other party also nodded. They knew better than Caroline the principle of putting on an act. "Come here." Nia tried to raise her hand, but she could only raise it halfway, so she simply gave up. Caroline quickly took Carlo's place and sat beside Nia, almost leaning over Nia's pillow. "Nia, speak, I can't hear you." Caroline almost pressed her ear to Nia's lips. I actually made a will." Nia gently held Caroline's hand. "It's for you." Caroline opened her eyes abruptly. "Nia, no matter whether the operation succeeds or fails in the end, Mr. Carlo, he will give it to you." "Nia, it's actually not much." Nia shook her head, after deducting the treatment fee, It's not much, why? Caroline was silent for a while. Because I'm the only one who came to visit you? One of the reasons, Nia said weakly. Thank you for being willing to accompany me when I was at my loneliest. Although you came less and less, but in the past 6 months, what I looked forward to the most was still your arrival. Nia, in our line of work, most of us have no choice, but since we've chosen this path, we can only continue on and then try to find another way out. Caroline looked at Nia, and Nia's gaze also fell on her, but Caroline felt that Nia's gaze was somewhere else. She said, I thought. I used to think that I had already found it. Memories were very torturous. They were like a flood that was about to break through a dam. A certain point suddenly weakened, and it broke through with the power of thousands of soldiers and horses. Nia was his senior, who had taken care of her very much. She had aged early, and her beauty had faded. She dressed up every day and sat on the street. Sometimes she would smoke a cigarette and sit still until the ash burned out. Only then would she move. Do you know how to make a man happy and let him ejaculate faster? There's a little trick. You can let a man kiss any part of your body, except for your lips. I've lived alone for a long time, so I more or less learned to cook some dishes. After all, it's a waste of money to eat outside every day, isn't it? Actually, I think my culinary skills are not bad. You have to learn to protect yourself. Take this thing, and if you meet those who don't pay, spit in their eyes, and then kick their dick. I started doing it when I was 15. Someone you loved? Have you ever loved someone before? Actually, it's not bad to open a cafe by the sea. If there's a guy who can play guitar to sing love songs to me every day, it might be even better. Caroline, I think I'm sick. Caroline, am I going to die? Nia. Caroline suddenly turned around and grabbed Nia's palm. You'll be fine. The surgery will be successful. It will be successful. Nia smiled slightly. Perhaps she felt relieved. The money in the will isn't much, but after you get it, maybe you can try to study. You're much younger than me. There should be a way out. It'll be fine. It'll definitely be fine. Caroline said sadly. Finally, Nia slowly closed her eyes as if she had accumulated to the limit. When it comes to men's words, don't believe them when you can. They're animals that are good at deceiving. Nia? Looking at Nia, who suddenly closed her eyes, Caroline suddenly panicked. Doctor! Call the doctor! Doctor! She tried to shake Nia's shoulder, but was stopped by Carlo, who reminded her, she's just asleep. The medicine she took made her drowsy. Don't wake her up. She's still very weak. Caroline could only nod. Outside the ward, the eldest cousin suddenly talked to Carlo, while the second cousin quickly handcuffed Caroline's hands again at this moment and covered them with her clothes again. Carlo didn't seem surprised when he saw the two of them holding hands, and he still said enthusiastically, Okay, gentlemen, it's a pleasure to work with you. I believe we'll be able to get a good amount of extra money in a few days. Lawyer Carlo? The eldest cousin suddenly smiled. Do you have a card? Maybe we'll have a chance to meet again in the future. Oh, it's my pleasure. Carlo handed over his card with a smile. This kind of thing often happened. Those in the underworld and lawyers who regarded professional ethics as bullsh*t were like dry firewood on fire. Caroline wasn't interested in the sudden mutual affection between the two. A nurse next to them happened to be pushing a cart with all kinds of medicine and medical tools on it. She just took something from it quickly when the eldest cousin and second cousin weren't paying attention, and then stuffed it into the pocket of her clothes. Carlo, and the other two said goodbye in front of the hospital. After that, the eldest cousin asked the second cousin what to do next. The second cousin said, Take this woman back. We'll talk about it after the lawyer gets the money in a few days. You follow this lawyer and see where he lives. They were still careful in doing things. The eldest cousin nodded and quietly followed Carlo. The second cousin suddenly grabbed Caroline's arm and said coldly, Let's go. Stay with us for another day. We will take good care of you, Miss Caroline. Wait a minute. I want to go to the toilet. Caroline stopped abruptly and covered her stomach. Really? The second cousin frowned, then pulled Caroline back to the hospital without saying a word. He brought Caroline to the ladies' washroom on the first floor. Seeing that there was no one nearby, he quickly pulled Caroline into the washroom. In the washroom, second cousin chose a toilet for Caroline that was for the disabled. The second cousin unlocked the handcuff on one side of his hand, then locked on the handrail next to the toilet, and said indifferently, "I'll give you 10 minutes." The second cousin quickly closed the door. After looking at the doors and windows in the ladies' bathroom, he walked out again and leaned against the wall outside the bathroom. 3 days ago, we experienced the first despair of our lives here. Some of us have already unfortunately died in this disaster. In front of the theater, people wearing black clothes and holding white candles in their hands quietly lined up in rows. There were many white roses placed around, and the candlelight dyed them yellow and white. In addition to the MC's speech, the sound of sobbing could be vaguely heard. It was probably the family or friends who lost their loved ones in the disaster. In the distance, a black private car was parked. From the back seat of the car, the window was slightly rolled down, and a pair of indifferent eyes swept through the crowd in front of the theater gate. "Why don't you let these people hold a memorial service in the theater?" Suddenly, there was a voice asking. It was Kusini, who was also sitting in the back seat of the car. Naturally, she was accompanied by Doflamingo, who had become Dr. San Francesco. The reason for this question was that San Francesco had secretly manipulated this memorial service early on. He asked people to reject the memorial service's request to apply for a venue and only allowed the area in front of the theater to be opened. In fact, since the end of the hijacking that day, the security department and the police searched the scene, and the theater had been closed. After all, there had been a gunfight inside, and many things were damaged. "Didn't I tell you?" San Francesco said. "Nuclear bomb?" Cassini was taken aback, then frowned. She was still in Sao Paulo with Vita of the LK Brotherhood in the morning and immediately rushed back here at noon without stopping. Regarding the reason why San Francesco chose to sponsor the renovation of the theater, Cassini only thought it was an unimportant joke. "Of course it's a joke." San Francesco laughed strangely at this time. "In fact, before Roger died, he hid something very important to me. Nothing was found on his body, and the police should not have found it either. So I suspect that it is still hidden in the theater." "What is it?" Cassini frowned and asked. San Francesco said indifferently, "If you can find it, you will know. Well, let people keep a close eye on it. Don't let anyone suspicious enter. I suspect that Roger's men are not all dead. Although Roger is a lunatic, he is not a fool. He should have some remaining men who did not directly participate in the hijacking, but outside to provide support. Then I will stay here." Cassini nodded. "No, you should accompany me to the banquet later." San Francesco shook his head. "Just tell the people below to do it. In addition, hurry up and find Buggy as soon as possible. I have something to ask him." "Yes, father." "Drive." San Francesco ordered the driver in a deep voice. The car slowly drove out. Almost at the same time, two figures were slowly coming from the side of the car. They were also looking at the memorial service in front of the theater. One person lowered his voice and said, "Miss Yi, you brought me here. Don't tell me you want me to attend this memorial service?" The people who came were Buggy and Miss Yi, the servant girl of the club. Miss Maid's eyes inadvertently swept over the black private car that had just driven away, then looked at Buggy and said indifferently, "Not attending, but performing." "Performing?" Buggy blinked his eyes. Miss Maid said at this time, "These people are now in a very interesting state, just in time for you to use. Listen, it is a little troublesome for you to develop your own belief. If it is under normal circumstances, it will take a long time and the effect will be slower. But because of the hijacking incident, you have a good opportunity. I still don't quite understand." Buggy shook his head. Miss Maid said indifferently, "They heard some news. At the same time, they're also wondering about one thing." "What is it?" Yi said indifferently, "My master once made a group deal with these people. My master didn't hide anything." "This?" Buggy was stunned, and vaguely, he seemed to think of something. "Go, show your miraculous power. Let me see how many believers you can get in one night." Yi smiled slightly. "Let me see how high your potential is." "But Buggy still wanted to say something. But in the blink of an eye, Miss Maid had disappeared out of thin air. Buggy knew that the woman had hidden and was observing him in the dark. There was no plan in advance, and she didn't clearly explain what needed to be done. She just let him go directly? Buggy smiled bitterly. He gritted his teeth and braced himself to walk into the crowd. On the rooftop opposite the theater building, Miss Maid was holding a street food pastel in her hand. It was bought from a stall of the young man who set up a stall on the street. But last time it was bought by Boss Luo, and he bought two. Tonight, it was bought by Miss Maid, and she only bought one. She ate quietly, and the night wind lifted her hair. Chapter 8:21. Mr. Orphy was very casual when he was working and would not always maintain his serious image. In fact, in the office, taking off his suit, undoing his tie, and rolling up his sleeves would make him feel more at ease. At 7:40 p.m., Mr. Orphy, who had finished testing the new listening device, still did not leave his workplace and chose to work overtime. In the afternoon, there were still some unresolved issues in the joint press conference with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In addition, according to intelligence, there was also a group of foreign agents who had infiltrated the country with unknown intentions. "Sir, we caught a few people unexpectedly." Suddenly, the secretary barged into Mr. Orphy's office, looking very anxious. Mr. Orphy knew that something serious must have happened, and his face darkened. "Who did you catch?" "Two men and a woman from the United States Federal Investigation Agency," the secretary said seriously. "What happened?" Mr. Orphy immediately realized the seriousness of the matter. "Sir, you asked me to thoroughly investigate the guest list on the day of the hostage case. I compared them one by one according to the surveillance video at the gate and the guest list, and found that there were a few people who did not match." The secretary quickly said they were going to leave at 4 p.m. on the train. "Fortunately, our people arrived in time, but in the process, one escaped." "Did these people say anything?" Mr. Orphy quickly asked. The secretary shook his head. "These people are very stubborn and did not say anything. They only asked that we should follow the humanitarian principle. I'm thinking that maybe we should use the truth-telling serum on them." "Yes." Mr. Orphy was very decisive. "Go and prepare. You must interrogate them as soon as possible. I'll be right there. Also, check the guest list again. I want to make sure that no one is left out." "Yes." The secretary went out directly. Mr. Orphy rubbed his forehead. The hostage case at the theater that day, it seemed that the more he investigated, the more he found out. It was like a bottomless abyss. He took a sip of coffee to refresh himself and planned to rush to the interrogation room immediately. However, he suddenly remembered something and called home. "Hello, it's me, Barbara." Is Louis back?" Dr. Frange brought Louis home in the afternoon. He's very obedient now and is writing his thoughts on today's visit to the Science Museum in his room. I'm accompanying him. "Thank you for your hard work, Babla." Mr. Orphy nodded before suddenly asking, "What about him? Is he not at home?" Mr. Orphy had a very bad relationship with his father, Dr. Frankie. As a maid, Barbara knew this very well. Therefore, she did not mind that Mr. Orphy had used him as a reference. "Oh, the doctor came back to watch the news and heard that there was another memorial gathering at the theater. He wanted to go and take a look, so he went out after dinner." "I'm fine now," Mr. Orphy said calmly. "Please keep Louis company. I might come back late tonight, or I might not come back at all. It's fine. I can work overtime." Barbara quickly agreed, then sighed and said, "Mr. Orphy, I really suggest that you find another wife. This family still lacks a mistress." "Barbara, I'm listening. What is it?" "Sorry to trouble you." After saying this, Mr. Orphy directly hung up the phone. Then he loosened his sleeves, buttoned them up, and put on his tie again. After that, he took off his suit jacket from the hanger and put it on. When he walked out of the office, Mr. Orphy suddenly covered the photo frame on the table. That was a photo of him and his late wife. Tapping the fingers of his left hand on the elbow of his right hand, the second cousin suddenly frowned and looked at the time. It hadn't even been 10 minutes yet, but he suddenly had a feeling that something was going to happen. At this moment, a woman was about to enter the ladies' washroom. The second cousin put his hand on the woman's shoulder without saying anything, saying coldly, "It's under maintenance. You could go somewhere else." The woman said unwillingly, "Who are you? There's no maintenance sign here. Why can't I go in?" The second cousin slightly narrowed his eyes. I said, "You can't go in." The ferocious gaze and the fingers that squeezed the woman's shoulders scared her. She retreated, turned around, and fled this place in horror, not daring to look back. The second cousin looked around and directly walked into the ladies' washroom. There happened to be a woman touching up her makeup in front of the sink. Seeing a ferocious man coming in, she immediately screamed. The second cousin simply lifted his clothes, revealing the pistol on his belt, and shouted, "Shut up and get out." The woman was so scared that she directly stuck to the wall, moving all the way past the second cousin, and then ran away quickly. The second cousin then quickly walked to the toilet for the disabled and slapped it a few times. "Come out. Time's up. Go away immediately." But there was no response from inside. The second cousin frowned and did not intend to continue waiting. He directly kicked the door open. What made him angry was that there was no one inside. Caroline had disappeared. The handcuffs were still hanging alone on the handrail next to him, and there were no signs of them being opened. However, the second cousin found a bottle of medical lubricant on the toilet bowl. There was a sticky liquid left on the handcuffs. The second cousin immediately understood how Caroline unlocked the handcuffs. Shit. He was so angry that he punched the door next to him, but he quickly reacted. He had been guarding outside and did not see Caroline come out. It was impossible for her to climb out of this toilet, so she must still be here. At this moment, the second cousin suddenly felt his vision turn dark. Something was directly over his head. It should be a bucket, the kind used to mop the floor and fill water. He quickly realized that Caroline was sneaking up on him. However, this toilet was very narrow. Although it was for the disabled, it was still not much spacious. Second cousin only felt that he had been kicked hard in the back, and he immediately bumped into the wash basin. The second cousin pressed his hands on the sink and supported his body. He pulled out the pistol on his belt with one hand. Just as he was about to fight back, he suddenly felt an unbearable weight. Caroline mercilessly kicked his crotch from behind. Legend has it that the pain factor when this place is injured is comparable to a woman's childbirth. The second cousin directly covered his crotch and fell down in pain. His head was still covered by the bucket. Kacha. The pistol fell to the ground at some point and slid out. Caroline suddenly shivered at this moment. She subconsciously picked up the pistol and pointed at the second cousin. Her hands trembled and she could not hold it steadily. She did not dare to shoot. She hurriedly escaped. Caroline had just rushed out of the corridor when she found that everyone was looking at her. In her panic, she kept holding the pistol in her hand. The crowd looked at her in horror, and some people even squatted on the ground in fear. "Bitch, don't even think about running." The second cousin had already rushed out. His expression twisted as he angrily rushed towards Caroline. It was just that his crotch was injured, so his running posture was somewhat decent. Caroline could not care too much. She lowered her head, hugged the pistol, and rushed out of the hospital door. Excuse me. Thank you. When Dr. Franch arrived, the memorial service had just begun. A pastor was invited, holding a Bible and a cross. After the MC finished his speech, it was the pastor's turn to speak. Dr. Franch finally squeezed to the front of the crowd, took off his hat, and lowered his head to listen. The pastor's voice slowly sounded. Dr. Franch was originally listening carefully, but at this moment, he was a little annoyed by the lowered voices of the two men beside him. "It's true. My brother-in-law is an officer in the police station. He told me that before their people arrived, those bandits were actually unconscious, and all the guns were mysteriously dismantled. And I heard that the bandits even installed a powerful bomb and detonated it. But miraculously, it did not have any power. Did you hear a very strange sound at that time? Dear guest, is there anything you need?" The man suddenly said quietly. The other party listened, and his eyes narrowed slightly. "You heard it too?" I thought it was an illusion at that time." "No, I really heard it. At that time, there was something invisible in the dark. I think I heard it too." I even agreed. At first, I just thought that I was too scared and hallucinated. This was the voice of the third man. "My wife has also been talking to me about this matter these 2 days." This was the fourth voice. Dr. Frankie frowned. It seemed that gradually more and more people began to discuss something that happened that day. He only managed to piece together a general idea from the bits and pieces he heard. Most of them heard the same voice, like a call from the depths of their hearts. The voice said the same thing to all of them. Some people agreed, some didn't, but the result was that their common wish was realized, and everyone was safe. Then, at the end of the kidnapping case, there were a few bizarre things. The bandits collectively fainted, the guns were inexplicably dismantled, and the explosion of the bomb did not have the original power. The voices of discussion seemed to be out of control. There was originally a strange atmosphere at the memorial service. Everyone was wearing black clothes, holding candles, and the surroundings were quiet. It seemed to be mysterious. A mysterious feeling came quietly. Dr. Franch felt more and more that something was wrong. Many people here seemed to have fallen into a strange mental state. They seemed to be dominated by their own conjectures and the inexplicable things in front of them, causing them to feel awe of certain things. The women hugged their children and joined in the discussion from time to time. The men were sometimes silent, sometimes trying to make some explanations, and sometimes unable to verify their opinions. Some people seemed to have left quietly, not intending to participate in this memorial service that suddenly changed. The pastor noticed that something seemed to have happened at the memorial service, so he cleared his throat, coughed twice, and said solemnly, "Please keep quiet." Then the crowd calmed down. I really heard it. It seemed that they were not completely calm, and they were still whispering. Dr. Franch shook his head, and he wanted to leave. As a scientist, he really did not agree with some people who supported mysticism. Anyway, he had already offered flowers and had a moment of silence. Thank the Lord for his mercy, allowing us to be rescued in the disaster. The pastor seemed to want to end this memorial service with a strange atmosphere as soon as possible, so he sped up his pace. Dr. Franch had already turned around, but at this moment, a man's voice suddenly came from the crowd, a little hoarse and a little disdainful. God can't save us. He only knows how to create humans, and after that, he doesn't care. Boo! The pastor suddenly looked like a cat whose tail was stepped on, and his face sank. Who is blaspheming? The man's voice came from the crowd again. The crowd began to stagger, tracking the source of the voice, and then made a straight path to the front. A guy wearing a loose suit and a mask raised his left hand at this time and slowly said, "I said it." Masks were a type that could be seen everywhere in the carnival, and it even gave people the feeling that this was something bought casually from a street stall. When a strange man saw that the crowd had made way for him, he swaggered forward and stopped in front of the priest. "Sir, what can I do for you?" The pastor's manners were still very good, even though this guy seemed to have some bad intentions. The guy with the mask looked around at this time. Of course, he was Buggy, who was left here by Miss Maid. Buggy also felt desperate. What could he do? There were police officers around the memorial service to maintain order. If it was in the past, there would be no problem. The key was that he was now a fugitive. Was it really a man to let him appear in front of the police officers openly? Fortunately, he found a shop that sold carnival masks. In Rio, a carnival city, it was really easy to find this kind of carnival mask. Even so, Buggy's heart was still beating fast at this time. God knew if these police officers would come up and directly take off his mask, and then there would be nothing left for him to do. She must have been watching from somewhere. That black-hearted maid. Chapter 822. In Terminal A, Oni said that he walked away for a while and needed to go to the washroom. After that, Luvia asked Luaccio if he wanted anything to drink. She could get something from the waiter in the lounge. Luaccio shook his head, and Luvia went to the lounge alone. Because it was an overseas flight, there were not many people in the lounge, or rather, there were only the three of them. Only Luaccio was left here. Luaccio picked up a magazine next to him and started reading. However, Luaccio's body suddenly turned into a puff of smoke and disappeared. The magazine he was holding suddenly fell to the ground, but before it fell, it was caught by someone so it did not alarm anyone. Boss Luo opened the magazine and glanced at it. It turned out to be an introduction to wild animals. Did something happen? Luvia came back with 2 glasses of water. Seeing Luaccio standing up instead of sitting, she asked curiously, Boss Luo smiled and said, "Nothing. I just want to stand up and move around. I sat for a long time." Luvia nodded and put down the glass. "It's almost time. Mr. Song should be back soon." Boss Luo nodded. At this time, Oni wiped his hands on his clothes and walked over. At the same time, he looked up at the TV on the wall and said to himself, "Memorial service?" Boss Luo and Luvia also looked at the TV. It turned out that it was the local news. It was reporting a memorial service in front of the Rio Municipal Theater. It seems that there's a riot. Luvia glanced at it indifferently. According to the report of the interviewer on the TV, it seemed that someone broke into the memorial service and caused trouble. Now, the police officers who maintained order at the scene were evicting the troublemaker. It's probably a boring guy who wants to be popular on the internet. Oni shrugged and looked at the man wearing a golden carnival mask who was arguing with several police officers. He shook his head. "What are you guys talking about?" Suddenly, a laughing voice came from the entrance of the lounge. Luvia's eyes suddenly softened. "Nothing. Just looking at the news." Song Howren, who suddenly appeared at the entrance, nodded and did not enter. He looked at the time and said, "Let's go. It's almost time to board the plane. Luochio, did you miss me?" Boss Luo shook his head and glanced at the TV. He suddenly smiled and walked towards Song Howren and said, "Maybe I miss your story. Do you have a new story?" Song Howren laughed. "I don't have anything new, but I can tell you the story of when I was 18 years old and chased after a group of pirates in the Caribbean Sea. Do you want to hear it?" Luo Chio wasn't surprised when Song Howren mentioned the Caribbean Sea, because Song Howren's mother was Spanish. "Hopefully, it will be a wonderful story. Your journey will not be boring." Song Howren patted Luochio's shoulder and led him toward the boarding gate. However, after turning around, Chun Xiaoyan placed his hand behind his back and secretly made an okay gesture toward Oni and Luvia. Oni and Luvia exchanged glances, and Oni whistled. "It seems the newcomers have passed the assessment. I will be able to see the beautiful Gan Hong in the village in the future. I think I can expand my harem." Luvia rolled her eyes and ridiculed. "You really are a walking cannon. Bang, 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 bang. Are you afraid of Gatling?" Oni spread his legs and quickly straightened his back a few times. Luvia shook her head. She could not be bothered with Oni and simply walked out. Before leaving, Luvia glanced at the TV again. The news was still playing. "The riot at the memorial service is not over yet." The camera turned back. "Right? He is trash. Let me go. Let me go." Although he felt that he might have taken the wrong script from the beginning, at this point, Buggy felt that he could only continue with all his might. At first, the script should have been like this. "Pastor, what did you say? Do you dare to say it again? How dare you despise our faith? You infidel. Buggy-eyed Buggy God. Pastor, madman. Madman, you are blaspheming God. You should be burned at the stake. Buggy, you know nothing about power. I will let you mortals see true power. Pastor, this is a miracle, a miracle. A miracle." Buggy, ah ha ha ha. However, the script in reality was like this. "Let me go. Let me go. Where are you dragging me? I have freedom of speech. This is a public place. Even if you are the police, you have no right to drive me away. Let me go." Even though his left and right hands were clamped by a police officer and he was being dragged away, he still shouted angrily. "Everyone, let's continue." The pastor reopened the scripture in his hand. He didn't have much opinion about the guy who suddenly broke in. Anyway, it wasn't the first time that anti-religious people had appeared to cause trouble. In fact, such things happened all the time around the world. He just felt that the troublemaker was a little irrational. There were many police officers around the memorial service to maintain order, but he still rushed forward to cause trouble. Just as the pastor said, after the police officers dragged the troublemaker away, the scene quieted down again. However, with such an incident and the discussion of some people before, the memorial service seemed to have completely lost its original intention. Some people quietly dispersed from the back and drove away. Because almost all of the people who came to the concert that night were from the upper class, the venue of the memorial ceremony was already packed with luxury cars. Otherwise, so many police officers would not have been deployed to maintain order. In fact, this road was even temporarily blocked. The sound of the car horns that left early was only in twos and threes at first, but later was nonstop. The memorial service seemed to be unable to continue. The pastor had already sped up his speech. His eyes were fixed on the scripture in his hand, and he didn't intend to raise his head. On the opposite rooftop, Miss Maid, who finished the last bite of pastel, burned the greasy paper bag directly to the police officer and then fell from the rooftop railing where she sat. Did I overestimate him? Miss Maid frowned and then shook her head gently. Her eyes turned and easily found the place where Bucky was at this moment. The police officers had already taken control of him. At this time, they planned to interrogate him about his origin and remove his carnival mask at the same time. Yi frowned. As a wanted criminal, if Bucky was taken away by these police officers here, there would be more trouble later. But just as Yi was about to take action, there seemed to be some small disturbance somewhere on the congested long street below. Yi suddenly stopped. Bucky. Yi narrowed her eyes. Is this what you got from Lucifer? The first wish you made. Bang! A loud sound. Caroline didn't know where she had run to. Second cousin had been chasing after her, so she could only choose to go where there were more people. The sound of panting. Yes, she could hear the sound of her breathing and the sound of her heart beating rapidly. She was running as fast as she could, and she was terrified. Caroline seemed to have seen such a scene somewhere, but she couldn't remember clearly where she had seen it. Maybe in a dream. Something was chasing after her relentlessly. Was it a vicious dog? That dream. She didn't know why there were suddenly a lot of cars around her. Maybe it was because of the bad traffic in this city, or something else, but Caroline didn't care so much. She passed through the gaps between the cars. There were so many obstacles that provided her with good cover, but she gradually felt a little uncomfortable. She had just sprained her ankle in Arnold's old house 2 nights ago. Now that she had been on the run for a long time, the pain from the old injury was extremely unbearable. Gradually, second cousin had caught up. She could even see the other party's ferocious smile. If he fell into his hands, he would probably take revenge on him for injuring his little brother, right? Don't come over. At the end of the road, Caroline, in despair, suddenly held the pistol she picked up from second cousin with both hands. She held both hands at the same time and pointed at second cousin with trembling fingers. Don't come over. Second cousin frowned and stopped. It was not easy for him to dodge. The two were in the middle of the cars at this time. He was simply the best target, the kind that could be hit even with his eyes closed. Do you dare to shoot? But after all, he was a gangster. He couldn't be said to be brave, but at least he was courageous. You, don't come over. Don't come over. Caroline slowly retreated. Second cousin was closing in step by step. However, screams. Those were the people who caught a glimpse of the poem between Caroline and second cousin. Perhaps it was because of the fear of being kidnapped not long ago. Some people's reactions were unusually intense. They opened the car door and fled desperately. Voices of panic rose and fell one after another. Second cousin didn't expect such a commotion to happen in the end. He just wanted to end all this as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to escape later. Second cousin gritted his teeth and suddenly pounced on Caroline. He didn't intend to give this woman any chance to react. He even had the urge to kill her. Caroline couldn't fight against the strong second cousin at all. She was almost instantly thrown to the ground by second cousin. This strong man's legs were pressing down on her hands, and his hands were pinching her neck at the same time. Second cousin pursed his lips. His veins swelled and were full of killing intent. Caroline kicked her legs in pain and struggled. She felt that her throat might be broken in the next second. Unwilling to die, the will to live made Caroline's hand that was holding the pistol move. Bang! Gunshot. Unfortunately, she couldn't aim at the man who wanted to kill her. The bullet just stuck close to the ground and shot at the tire of a private car next to her. The burst tire also made a loud noise in the next moment. The loud noise echoed on the long street. The people in front and behind didn't know what happened behind them. They only heard gunshots. It seemed to be the sound of an explosion. Screams rang out, and the scene became even more chaotic. But second cousin still didn't intend to let go of Caroline. He had already seen Caroline's red face. If he persisted, this troublesome woman could be solved. As for the matter with Lawyer Carlo, he believed that as long as he put the knife in front of this lawyer, he would cooperate obediently. Unfortunately, you missed the chance to kill me. Second cousin let out a grim smile. The touch of pinching Caroline's neck gave him a strange sense of excitement. It was the joy of killing. Caroline struggled in pain. Her eyes were wide open. Her eyes were bloodshot, and tiny blood vessels appeared. She could no longer breathe. In a state of near death, Caroline seemed to see a beam of white light. Her consciousness was fleeting. She saw a lot of messy things. She was very unfamiliar with the scene. There was the scene of her talking to someone she didn't know. There was the scene of her holding a gun and walking through the rain of bullets. She was holding something high. She was losing something. When she was sad, when she was reveling, when she was lonely, when she hugged someone all of a sudden. Bang! There seemed to be another noise. Caroline's consciousness was a little confused. Her ears were buzzing because the tire was smashed next to her. Her eardrums were under pressure. She seemed to see Second Cousin covering his shoulder with a twisted expression. Second Cousin suddenly gritted his teeth, quickly picked up the pistol from his hand, and then fired at something. Second Cousin covered his injured shoulder, retreated, and fired. Then, he disappeared from Caroline's sight. Caroline suddenly felt as if she was being picked up by someone. She saw a uniformed police officer looking at her, as if asking questions. In the end, Caroline slowly closed her eyes and fainted. Calling. There's a woman unconscious calling the front desk. There's also a man with a gun. The location is the street outside the municipal theater. Calling. He ran over there. You stay and take care of the injured. Everyone up front, try not to shoot. There are too many people now, and it's easy to accidentally injure someone. Quick. You can't do this to me. I have civil rights. Buggy was still holding on, holding his mask tightly, unwilling to let it be taken off. However, his resistance obviously aroused the police officer's anger. You'd better cooperate. Otherwise, you'll suffer. You're not allowed. There was a sudden loud noise. Officer Buggy stopped all of a sudden. Everyone was startled because they knew very well that this sound was a gunshot. After that, there was a suspected explosion. Go and take a look. You stay here and watch this guy. A guy who looked like a leader suddenly threw away the cigarette, but in his hand, pulled out his gun from the holster, and rushed quickly to the source of the sound with his men. What happened? The police officer who stayed behind at this time looked from afar, seemingly quite concerned about what happened in front of him. But this time, he suddenly felt a hard hit from behind. He suddenly fell to the ground, and at the same time, a pair of legs directly clamped his neck. At the same time, his hands were twisted. Which troublemaker was wearing a carnival mask? Deadly scissor kick. I haven't used it for many years. You forced me. The police officer quickly slapped the floor a few times, and because of the lack of oxygen, he quickly fainted. Troublemaker. Buggy breathed a sigh of relief and got up from the ground in a sorry state. He took out the key from the police officer's clothes and unlocked his handcuffs. He quickly looked at the chaotic scene in front of him, took off his mask without saying a word, stuffed it into his clothes, and quickly fled this place. Help! Is there anyone? Is there anyone? Save my husband. He was hit by a bullet. Help! 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 The sound of crying. They should be the guests who were about to leave after attending the memorial service. At this time, in the crowd, a lady was holding a man. The man's abdomen was bleeding constantly, and he was dying. I've called an ambulance. But, looking at the situation of the blockage, it's estimated that they won't be able to come in for a while. Someone said helplessly, who knows how to stop the bleeding temporarily? Someone hurriedly suggested, it's impossible to stop the bleeding, this amount of bleeding. Someone sighed. They could only watch as the grieving woman hugged her husband and wept. Who can save my husband? I beg you. Is there no one? The woman painfully lay on her husband's chest, wailing loudly. At this time, I'll do it. I'll save him. A loud voice rang out. The man with the carnival mask pushed the crowd aside and walked out. He crossed his hands on his chest and solemnly said, In the name of the omniscient and omnipotent, the great Buggy, I, the apostle of the great omniscient and omnipotent Buggy, can save him. F***. My luck is here. I really can't stop it. Fortunately, I didn't throw away the mask just now. Chapter 823. In the name of the omniscient and omnipotent, the great Buggy, I, the apostle of the great omniscient and omnipotent, can save him. It was solemn, sacred, and seemed to have a little mysterious aura. Night, street lights, chaos, everyone's eyes gathered, and they held their breaths. The woman looked at her husband with grief. At this moment, wearing the carnival mask, he seemed to have become a ferryman of souls, giving people an indelible impression. Probably. However, isn't this the guy who made trouble just now? Don't make trouble. Get out of here. A group of people surged forward and directly pushed the carnival masked man out. Then, they continued to talk about it. In this case, unless a miracle happened, the man who was shot would probably only be able to return to the arms of God. I tell you, you will be punished by the omniscient and omnipotent Buggy. Oh, don't hit. Don't hit my face. Who touched my dick? Oh. Buggy climbed out of the crowd, awkwardly. He covered the carnival mask on his face with one hand and hurriedly climbed to the front of the lady who was holding her husband. He quickly said, "Listen, madam, your husband won't live long. You should know this in your heart. Why don't you let me try it this time? What if I can save him? If you don't allow it, then you will become the murderer of your husband. Kill this fraud." Wait. The lady hesitated for a moment, then quickly wiped the tears in her eyes and grabbed Buggy's arm hard. Can you really save him? Buggy wanted to nod, but suddenly remembered Miss Maid's explanation about the probability he got. He glanced at the jewelry on the lady and suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He lowered his voice and said, "I think I can at least give you some time to make a will for your husband." The lady was stunned. At this time, someone began to pull Buggy up, and then several people held him at the same time. It seemed that they were going to hand him over to the police. The police were fighting with a man with a gun in this traffic jam and had no time to care about the situation here. Please wait a minute, I want him to try," the lady suddenly said at this time. "Madam, you're really desperate." Someone shook his head. "Who knows what he'll do? It is possible that he will lead to your husband's death sooner." Even though the man who was shot didn't seem to have much longer to live. "This is my husband. I have the right." The lady took a deep breath and looked at Buggy. "But if you lie to me, I will make you regret it for the rest of your life." Buggy struggled a few times, and those who were holding him let go of him. Buggy straightened his fake Zegna suit, then put his hands on his chest and said seriously, "Madam, I think your husband will be happy with your decision." The lady got up from the ground, grabbed Buggy's shoulders, pulled him in front of her, and said in a low voice, "Can you really give him time to make a will?" Buggy decided to end the battle quickly. Without saying a word, he asked people to move the man who had been shot to the side. Several unwilling men worked together to lift the man who had been shot. Looking at the blood flowing out of his chest, they were frightened. At this time, Buggy didn't have time to do a lot of rituals and spells to improve his professionalism. He took out the small bottle given to him by the servant girl, opened it, and quietly hid it in his collar. Then he pressed his hands directly on the man's chest. In the night, it was easy to see that Buggy's hands were slightly emitting a milky white light. Gradually, it spread across the chest of the man who had been shot. These glimmers were intermittent, appearing and disappearing, and then quickly appearing again. Some people with sharp eyes saw that the back of Buggy's neck and the end of his hair were wet. The lady stared at her husband and then covered her mouth in disbelief. That was because the man's complexion was gradually improving. His eyelids began to move slightly, and then he slowly opened his mouth. He was a little weak, but he did speak. "Is this heaven?" Finally, Buggy released his hands and slowly stood up. Because he was wearing a carnival mask, no one could see that Buggy's lips were trembling at this moment. This blessing spell could only slightly stimulate people's potential. To put it bluntly, it accelerated the metabolism of the human body, giving people a feeling of health and spirit. Buggy didn't know how many times he had used it back and forth. Anyway, He had already drunk a bottle of spirit recovery potion according to the servant girl's instructions. At this moment, he had a splitting headache and his eyelids were heavy. He really wanted to sleep like this. It would be best if he could sleep on a pair of big breasts. The man who had been shot also slowly stood up at this time. Under everyone's incredible gaze, he unbuttoned his shirt, revealing the place where he had been shot. Except for the blood on the skin, there was no wound there. I'm not dreaming, right? Miracle. This may be a trick. These people may be in cahoots. A questioning voice came from the crowd. Buggy put his hands on his chest and said indifferently, I am the omniscient and omnipotent, the apostle of the great Buggy who walks on earth. His legs suddenly left the ground and floated up. Then he disappeared from the sky in an instant. The questioning voice was instantly drowned in the screams. Everyone looked up at the night sky blankly, but they didn't notice that a trace of fanaticism flashed in the eyes of the man who had been shot. He muttered to himself, the great omniscient and omnipotent, the great omniscient and omnipotent, the great omniscient and omnipotent, the great... Wah! High in the sky, a frightened scream sounded, and then a figure fell from the sky, landing on a rooftop of a building directly opposite the theater. Doing this kind of free fall and directly hitting the rooftop, ordinary people would probably die instantly. But obviously, this person didn't. His body stopped at the moment when he was about to hit the floor of the rooftop. He stopped abruptly when he was less than 10 centimeters away from the ground, and then he fell to the ground again. Buggy hurriedly got up at this time and took off the carnival mask, unable to hide the excitement in his eyes. Miss, did you see that? I did it. I brought that man back to life. Really, I really saved her life. Well done, Mississippi Maid responded indifferently. Buggy chuckled and then asked in confusion, but why did you take me away so quickly? I think I can continue to perform. I will definitely make those who doubt me suffer. I have my plans. Yi shook her head, and although that man is alive now, he is still in danger, because you only accelerated the healing of his wounds, but the bullet still remains in his body. Buggy thought for a while, but he should have died, but I gave him time. You took out the emerald green olive miter, so you were lucky enough to get the initial source of faith. People were saved in the despair of dying. After the thought was compressed for a moment, it sublimated into a fanatical worship of you. What a lucky guy. How should I put it? Although it was a bit of a fluke, the final result was that it was much better than what he had expected. Mississippi Maid of the club looked at Buggy and then walked into the night. Find a place to rest by yourself. That's all for today. Huh? What should we do next? Do nothing. Wait. Mademoiselle's servant girl left without a sound. Buggy took a deep breath, then approached the railing of the rooftop and gradually calmed down. At the same time, he looked at the chaotic street below. Maybe he should wait until the scene was evacuated before leaving. At this time, he suddenly thought of something and quickly ran to the only iron door that led downstairs. Locked? How do I go down? On the moving stretcher bed, Caroline's eyelids moved and then slowly opened. She took a deep breath, sat up abruptly, and then breathed heavily. At the same time, she touched her neck in a panic. Her neck was red, and it was a very conspicuous bruise. Caroline looked around. There were several injured people around her. Some seemed to have sprained, while others were lying flat and playing with their mobile phones. Many police cars appeared around. The originally congested street had been cleared a lot. Several police cars were parked nearby, and the red and blue rotating lights flashed back and forth. Suddenly, a police officer walked to Caroline, squatted down, and asked, Miss, you're awake? Are you okay? Are you conscious? Caroline shook her head and nodded again. She opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but when she remembered that she was involved in the Olivia murder case, she swallowed her words back. Miss, who is the murderer who attacked you? What's your relationship? Why did he want to kill you? The police officer stared at Caroline and asked. That person. Caroline looked nervous. The police officer shook his head and said, he escaped during the shootout. My head hurts. Can you give me a doctor? Caroline hugged her head with a painful expression. The police officer had to say, Miss, wait, I'll be right there. Seeing the police officer walk away, Caroline quickly got up. The police officer also looked back frequently. When he saw Caroline's actions, he quickly stopped her. However, Caroline picked up the stretcher on the ground and threw it at him. Taking advantage of this time, she quickly rushed into a nearby alley. When the police officer caught up, she was already gone. Calling, there's a suspicious woman in her 20s wearing a light blue coat, about 175 meters tall, from the 4th Avenue, 11 o'clock in the evening. A lot of people gathered in a small bar rebuilt from a basement. At this time, there were still people coming one after another. Now, 2 more men were here. Their car was parked far away, but the 2 did not get out of the car immediately. Boss Boston, Johnny has successfully escaped, but he was shot in the shoulder. Do you think we should? A man looked at Boston, who was sitting in the driver's seat, and asked. These 2 were none other than the boss Boston, who had captured Caroline and Arnold. He can't even take care of a woman, and he even ate a bullet. Boss Boston's tone was unfriendly. This Johnny is really getting worse and worse. However, since he has left, let's not bother about him first. Business is more important. Get out of the car. It should be starting soon. When we go in later, be alert and don't cause trouble. There are some ruthless people inside. The underling nodded and then asked puzzledly, Boss, who are we going to meet? Why are we so nervous? Boston shook his head and said, I don't know, but it should be a very powerful guy. I just saw Josh Yason's car. Even he is here. Josh Yason. His territory has 2 streets. Even such a fierce person is here. The underling was secretly shocked. People like Josh Yason were already big shots that they looked up to. Boss Boston, who he followed, was at best a small group of a few guys, doing some work here and there. He did not even have a fixed territory. Of course, there were many gangs like them in this city. Boss Boston pushed the door open, and many eyes in the bar gathered on him at the same time. Boston saw some familiar faces, but there were also many faces that he needed to look up to. He quickly walked in with his men and walked towards a corner of the tavern. A man with a scar on his forehead was sitting there, and behind him stood 2 strong guys, the only guys that Boston had a relationship with. Boson also came here because he received the invitation from this guy. Has it started, Boss Lancey? Boston sat down and asked quickly, Why are you here? Lancey frowned. Boston shrugged and was about to speak when Lancey suddenly made a gesture to be silent. Sure, the main character is here. Boston quickly looked in the direction Lancey was looking at. A woman wearing sunglasses, with her blonde hair tied up and wearing a black Western dress, came out of the bar's inner hall. Behind the woman were 4 tall and strong men. The woman looked around and said, I'm sorry, I just participated in a rather important banquet. I've kept everyone waiting. The woman had just finished speaking when a bald man with a cigar in his mouth raised his hand and said, Who are you? Why did you call us here? The woman said indifferently, Are you satisfied with the $500,000 that came with the invitation? The bald man sneered. If it weren't for the money, I wouldn't have come here, and I wouldn't have had the patience to wait for you here for so long. However, if you don't make your purpose clear, I'm sorry, but I won't take out the $500,000. That was a greeting gift for all of you. Of course, I'm happy that you accepted it. The woman smiled faintly, and then suddenly clapped her hands. Everyone suddenly became nervous, and the men behind the bosses quickly took out their guns. Don't be nervous. I'm just showing you something. The woman waved her hand. One of the men behind her carried a black box to the front of the crowd. He put the box in front of the counter and opened it. I hope you can become my partners and sell these things well. The woman in sunglasses stood with her hands behind her back and looked at the crowd again. What's this? A slightly plump middle-aged man stood up, walked to the counter, and picked up the bags of coarse salt-like things in the box. He suddenly frowned. This is bath salts. It's a newly developed product. The blonde woman in sunglasses clapped her hands again. 2 of the men she brought quickly walked back inside, and then walked in with a dispirited guy. This dispirited guy was obviously a guy with a heavy drug addiction. At this time, his expression was sluggish. After the 2 strong men threw him to the ground, this guy was still smiling foolishly. The blonde woman gave another order, and one of the men picked up the goods in the black box, took out a little and fed it to the addict. Chapter 824. In the small lounge in the basement, several men were hugging the drug addict who was fed the new drug at the same time. This guy's body was still thin, but under the entanglement of several big men, he burst out with strength that didn't belong to them. His condition seemed to be very good, and even his reaction became abnormally fast. All the bosses were amazed. This wrestling had lasted for more than 10 minutes. In the end, the drug addict suddenly lost all his strength and fell to the ground. He seemed to have fallen asleep. This guy is simply a beast. A burly man returned to his boss's side and touched his shoulder with his hand. There was a bite wound on his shoulder. The blonde woman in sunglasses stood up at this time. "Everyone, how do you feel about its effect?" The bald man with a cigar frowned and said in a deep voice, "What's the situation with this guy now?" He pointed to the drug addict who fell to the ground and asked. The blonde woman in sunglasses said indifferently, "His consciousness still exists, but he has fallen into a delusion. Because of the effect of the drug, his mental activity index has far exceeded the nervous reflexes, so his brain can only shut down the command of all the functions of his body, and his own consciousness has fallen into a frenzy of excitement. Perhaps he is experiencing true bliss." "This is what you said. Why should I believe it?" The blonde woman in sunglasses said indifferently, "The good's here. I will give you some test products. Whether the effect is good or not, you can go back and find someone to test it. Of course, you can also directly choose to cooperate with me now and become our collaborator. Time is money, and money is king." The scene was silent, and no one wanted to be the first person to stand up. Suddenly, a doubtful voice came from the corner. "In the past 2 days, a kind of zombie bath salt appeared in Sao Paulo. It shouldn't be this kind of thing, right? After that thing is eaten, it will make people crazy and bite people. It is said that several people have taken it and eventually died." The blonde woman in sunglasses smiled and said, "I want to ask, among the many drugs on the market now, which one is not dangerous in the case of overdose?" This was the truth. There had never been a drug that didn't bear a lot of blood debt. "Sorry, I'm just running a casino. I'm not interested in this kind of thing." A woman in her 30s suddenly stood up. "I'm not interested in such a deal. Here's the 500,000 you sent. I'll return it to you." She asked her subordinates to take out stacks of cash and put them on the table. Then, she left with her people. The blonde woman in sunglasses seemed unmoved. The woman who put down the money led her 3 subordinates out of the door. However, not long after, a few screams suddenly came from outside. Everyone's expression changed slightly. Someone hurriedly pushed the door open to take a look. The woman and her subordinates had already fallen outside dead. This instantly infuriated the dangerous people present. They pulled out their guns one after another, and the atmosphere in the narrow bar suddenly became tense. "Miss, aren't you being too overbearing? Or do you really think that we would be afraid of you just because of the few of you?" The blonde woman in sunglasses suddenly sat down and crossed her legs. Her subordinates poured her a glass of sake. She smiled and said, "I just gave you time to consider, but I didn't give you the right to refuse. In addition, perhaps your bullets are enough to kill me, but unfortunately, I'm just an agent. After I die, many people like me will appear. But on the contrary, you may not necessarily be the same. Are you threatening us?" Another sneer sounded. "I grew up being scared." Bang! Just as he finished this sentence, he suddenly fell to the ground. A bloody hole directly appeared on his forehead, but neither the blonde woman in sunglasses nor her 4 subordinates moved. "By the way, I forgot to tell you that I have arranged 5 sniper rifles outside." The woman drank a mouthful of sake. "You kill my big brother? I'll kill you. Bitch!" It was the brother of the man who was just shot. At this time, he pulled out his gun and roared. However, his gun was shot down in an instant, and a bullet hit his forehead in an instant. "Green Scorpion." The blonde woman in sunglasses put down the glass and said softly, "One of our gunmen. Green Scorpion." Hearing this name, everyone's face changed dramatically. Boss Boston, who wanted a freeload, became very nervous now. He looked at Boss Launchy beside him in horror, asking quickly, "Who's Green Scorpion?" He's the #1 gunman in the underground assassination world in South America. It's said that he's a horrible guy who can use a sniper rifle as a pistol. Boss Boston subconsciously touched the pistol hidden under his clothes and couldn't help but feel a sense of despair. Behind this blonde woman in sunglasses, there might be an unimaginably huge force. This force was enough to wipe out all the people at the scene. In the gray world, the other party was like a great white shark, and they were just slightly bigger fish. How much for these goods? $250 per gram. The blonde woman in sunglasses said indifferently. It's 4 times the price of the highest purity heroin. A roar sounded. The woman looked at him. Sir, what did you say just now? I didn't hear it. Can you repeat it? Haha, that's a good price. Another big boss next to that person walked out with a laugh. He walked to the boxes and picked up one of them. The higher the purchase price, the higher the selling price. I want 3 kilograms of goods, right? Give me 2 kilograms first. 5 kilograms will do. I just received a batch of goods last month, so I don't have that much liquid gold on hand. Seeing the bosses transfer money to the account provided by the blonde woman and then take the corresponding amount from her, Boston couldn't help but stare blankly. Boston didn't move for a long time, which finally attracted the blonde woman's attention. She looked at Boston and said indifferently, It seems that this gentleman is still considering. Boston looked around and saw that everyone's eyes were focused on him. He immediately swallowed and said nervously, Can I only get 200 grams? 200 grams? The blonde woman couldn't help but be startled. Boston's boss could only say embarrassedly, It's not that I don't want to buy more, but I really don't have that much money. He's just a punk who hasn't been out for long. He doesn't even have his own territory, Lanchi suddenly said. Boss Lanchi suddenly spoke up, as if he wanted to help. Actually, I was the one who called him here to see the world, so I'm afraid he wasn't on your invitation at the beginning. Poston immediately cast him a grateful look. Do you have your own sales channel? The blonde woman suddenly asked again. Boston's boss quickly said, We're all mobile at the moment. Basically, the customers we sell to our students in school. We have sales channels from a school. In addition, there are people who like to go to nightclubs. I see. The blonde woman nodded. How about this? There's 1 kilogram here. You take it back first, and you can pay me the next time you get the goods. Don't try to escape. We'll find you. I know. Boston's boss nervously took the amount that was on credit, and his smile was uglier than crying. Happy cooperation. The blonde woman raised her glass to everyone. After 12 o'clock, only the blonde woman and several of her men were left in the small bar. Get rid of this guy. She waved her hand at this time and asked them to take away the drug addict who was used as an experiment, and she stayed here alone. The woman took off her sunglasses, put down her hair, and then made a phone call. Father, it's me, Cosini. The first step has been completed. You've worked hard. Go back, take a good bath, and have a rest. There will be a lot of work later. In a high-end apartment far away from this small bar, St. Fran walked naked to the floor-to-ceiling window and threw the phone that he had just turned off on the big bed. And on the bed, 2 young women with hot figures were making love to each other. Suddenly, the 2 women on the bed climbed down at the same time, like domesticated cats, came to St. Fran's feet, and began to rub his body with their bodies. They were constantly looking for something, and seemed to be in a strange state. St. Fran laughed at this time, walked 2 steps, and took out a bottle from the table. There was some white powder in the bottle. He sprinkled the powder on the ground, and the 2 young women instantly threw themselves on the ground and began to lick it. St. Fran looked indifferently at the 2 women who were completely zombified, and then looked at the bottle in his hand. He didn't remember how he got the formula to make this thing. In fact, he didn't need to remember it. He didn't need to remember the angry expression of the former leader of the Imperial Capital Command after he knew that he betrayed him. Anyway, in the end, he still died under the betrayal of his own son, Roger, and became the shield for his successful escape. He didn't need to remember how crazy he was when he took the formula from him, because this formula now belonged to him. He didn't need to remember the years of prison life, because it made him fade out of the sight of many people and also gave him plenty of time to plan something. Although it came out earlier than expected, but St. Fran narrowed his eyes. Life is interesting when there are some unknown things. Suddenly, St. Fran raised the bottle in his hand and pointed it at the moon under the night sky. It's so beautiful. In the end, who made you? I spent several years in prison trying to change this formula, but I didn't succeed. Instead, I made several byproducts. In the dark alley, Caroline walked quickly with her head down. There shouldn't be any police officers coming to find her. She squatted at the back door of a restaurant. She was so tired that she had to choose a place to rest. Suddenly, there seemed to be the sound of footsteps. Caroline quickly hid and found that it was the restaurant staff who were cleaning up the garbage. Caroline hadn't eaten for a whole day. She suddenly had an idea. She sneaked into the restaurant from the back door while the restaurant staff weren't paying attention. The restaurant had already ushered in the final stage of closing. The people left behind began to lock the door after turning off the lights. Soon after, Caroline turned on the lights of the restaurant in the dark. There was still a lot of leftovers in the kitchen, some leftover soup base in the pot, and bread. Caroline was so hungry that she quickly stuffed the bread in her mouth, then turned on the gas stove, thinking to heat up the cold soup base. She gobbled it up. She sat alone in the kitchen, nervously looking around. Perhaps she could safely sleep here and wait for the restaurant to open tomorrow morning, then find a chance to leave? As Caroline thought about it, she was so sleepy that her eyelids drooped uncontrollably. So, she leaned against the cupboard and fell asleep. She seemed to have another dream. In the dream, she saw a lot of things. A man was pinching her neck with his hand. Caroline wanted to see the other party's face clearly, but under the light, she couldn't see the other party's real appearance. However, there was a very special tattoo on his chest. She still struggled frantically, but her hands and feet were obviously firmly grasped by something. It was a hand, a few men's arms. Suddenly, a man came over with something in his hand. He took out the thing inside, then grinned. They seemed to be talking about something, but that was all Caroline could see. She couldn't hear anything. The man who came later and the man who pinched her neck seemed to have a few words. Then he bent down and stuffed something into his mouth. Caroline finally saw the man's appearance clearly. It was Boss Boston. She would never forget this face. It was because of the appearance of this black boss that her originally terrible life became even worse. Nightmare. Dash! Caroline opened her eyes abruptly. On the cold kitchen floor, a cockroach crawled past. Caroline stood up instinctively and stepped on the cockroach very quickly. She supported herself on the kitchen counter. After having such a nightmare, she felt as if she had sex with 4 or 5 men all day. She was so tired that she felt weak. Caroline supported herself on the wall and walked into the restaurant's bathroom. She washed her face and seemed to feel much better. She looked at herself in the mirror. The bruise on her neck that was pinched by second cousin was very obvious. She also saw that the whites of her eyes were filled with blood and were completely red. She looked like a malicious spirit and was extremely terrifying. Caroline frowned. She was almost close to the mirror on the sink. She opened her eyes with her fingers and looked at her eyeballs. She was worried that there would be something wrong with her eyes. Suddenly, she saw a terrifying flame, like a volcanic eruption, pushing open the bathroom door directly. The flame swallowed her directly. She even saw herself being burned black in the fire. Her eyeballs were still red. Caroline shuddered suddenly. She was still in the bathroom. The faucet was not turned off, and the sound of running water could be heard. Caroline opened her mouth. She suddenly remembered something. Without saying a word, she rushed out of the door and ran back to the kitchen. At this time, the scene in the kitchen shocked Caroline. She forgot to turn off the gas stove. The bottom of the thick soup had long been burned to foam. The fire was extinguished, but gas overflowed. The entire kitchen was filled with the smell of natural gas. Caroline hurriedly turned off the gas valve and turned on the kitchen's exhaust fan. When the gas was almost exhausted, she breathed a sigh of relief. Caroline secretly thought that it was a close call. If a spark suddenly appeared, I'm afraid I would be. It was really a false alarm. Caroline shook her head. She felt dizzy and tired. She slowly walked out of the kitchen, came to the sofa in the dining room, and lay down. Not long after, She fell asleep again. Silence, silence, silence. Only the ticking sound of the wall clock in front of the restaurant could be heard. Suddenly, a mosquito buzzed over. After sucking Caroline's blood, it flew away shakily. It flew to the kitchen and was suddenly attracted by something. It was the mosquito extinguishing lamp. The mosquito suddenly hit it. Pa! The electric net instantly burned the mosquito's body into black, and a few sparks fell.